Okay, hello everyone. Music here. How you guys doing? We've got a nice panel lined up for you guys, and then we've also got a talk on building smarter with the material layer. Today we're going to be in the first talk talking about the passion to profession, and with this panel, our journey and the difficulties we faced along the way. I'm going to let Jacob take over and just go to town with you guys. Yeah, I imagine you have quite an interesting conversation to have. So welcome,
All right.
everyone.
Thank you, Jeremy. Let's go to town, everyone, as Jeremy put it nicely.
Don't quote me.
Yeah, my name's my name's Jacob Norris, founder of Sierra Division Outsource Studio and Online Academy. I wanted to talk with everyone today about a few things related to not only breaking into the industry, but also as an artist, kind of what that means to you when you're starting out in the industry. Um, what that comes to when it's like the jobs that you're going to be doing, the people that you're going to be working with, the places that you're going to be working in, and quite a different variety of topics just to help give you a good idea and kind of overview as far as what working in the industry is actually like. And with that in mind, we've got an amazing panel here, a ton of people from all over the world, quite a few different places that they've worked, as well as just a ton of experience. So I'm really happy to have all of you here with me. Let's do some introductions and pass it off to Javier first.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob, and thanks, Jeremy, and everyone at Dynasty for the invitation. Super excited to be here. So my name is Javier Perez. I'm currently the lead material artist at PlayStation Studios Visual Arts. I've been in the industry for about 15 years now. A couple notable things I've worked on are the Last of Us franchise, Call of Duty, and Metal Gear Solid. Besides just my professional work, I also love teaching and mentoring. So I also teach at Laguna College of Art and Design and Noman School of Visual Effects.
Great, thank you. And Laura, yourself?
Hi everyone, my name's Laura Dilloway. I'm currently art manager at Airship. We are an outsourced company based in the UK and I'm in the east of England. So I have worked in the industry for just coming up on 20 years. I've worked in AAA studios. I started off at PlayStation, working at Sony Cambridge, later Gorilla Cambridge, and then I've moved into indie. So I've worked in both full end-to-end studios and also now in outsource AAA and tiny indie, mid indie. Some notable franchises that I worked on include the Killzone franchise and Little Big Planet, which is a hugely bizarre range, but it's been really, really fun. In my spare time, I also run a student festival called Gamebridge, which is based here in the UK, and it's aimed at linking students who are just graduating up with people from industry. So I also have quite a lot of ties between trying to get students into the places that they're trying to be and working with industry and education to make those links.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be plenty for you to share. So thank you. Miroslav, yourself.
Hey, yeah, my name's Miroslav Baev. I'm a senior environment artist at Sierra Division. I've been in the industry for about 5 years professionally and about 2 years self-taught. I've worked on AAA titles and projects and lots of smaller ones, and I've learned a lot of stuff over the years. I specialize in props and environments, and now as a fun side passion, I also do stylized environment art.
Thanks for joining us, Miro. And this is actually the first
Thank you for
time
having
I've
me.
learned how to pronounce your last name. I always thought it was Baev. So, Baev.
Close enough.
Yeah, I'll remember next time. Yeah. Yeah, so just kind of jumping into things, then I thought it'd be great for us to be able to share a little bit about like our journey kind of getting into games, because a lot of people nowadays, whether they're studying at home or taking like online courses, or going to like proper universities and academies, like the aspect of actually breaking in and starting your first job, uh, especially a lot of times when they're asking for, how many years of experience or what it takes to actually get through the door and the first steps. Let's see how we did it and maybe how it might look today for others looking to do the same. Um, yeah, I think, Laura, this might be a good one for you to start off with if you want to give it a go.
I said I would start this one mostly so you can disregard it because I did this so long ago that it's kind of not really relevant anymore, and it's really interesting how that has changed over the years. So when I was at university, I did go to university, so I did study a course, but I didn't study a games course. I studied computer visualization and animation because I wanted to go into TV, interestingly. So I'm an environment artist. I forgot to mention that in my introduction, but basically I'm a history nerd and I wanted to do. There's a TV show in the UK called Time Team. I don't know if anyone knows it, but basically they will dig up like archaeological bits of like castle and pot and like wall and things like that. And I wanted to do like the 3D reconstructions that they have on the show. Um, and this was like learning the graphics that was kind of my route into it. And so I went to university, I studied this generalist course. It had loads of other stuff in it. There was like maths, there was programming, there was like visual studies, there was life drawing, there was like cinematography, there was compositing, there was like a huge wide range of stuff, but it allowed you to kind of specialize. I did make a game in my second year, so that was kind of like an interesting sort of insight into sort of games. And I've played games kind of all my life. I just never really thought about it as a career. And so when I was graduating, we basically, there were a bunch of companies that we'd worked for as part of the course, fulfilling briefs and things in our final year. And they were sort of like had eyes on who was graduating and like interesting students that they liked the work of. And I'd done some work that a company had like sort of seen and liked the look of, and they'd asked me to send a few more examples of stuff that I had been producing over the time I was at university. And then I pretty much got asked to interview the day that I graduated, which is crazy these days. But the takeaway, I suppose, from that is that finding somewhere that has really good links to industry is really, really important. And that does still stand true. Like if you can find a course or find an event that has like got these links where industry people are kind of seeing you, maybe they're mentoring you, maybe they're guiding your work just before you've graduated, that I have seen be really, really successful because like they're already invested in you. They've already been like, there's something interesting about that person that I feel like might be really promising. So that was my journey in, which was yeah, very unexpected. So I never planned to work in games. Maybe that's done me well. I'd like to talk about a bit later when we get the chance. But I have been ever since, and I've never thought about leaving. So clearly something happened right. So
That's kind of interesting because there's been a few other folks that I know who didn't realize until, even into their 20s that like, oh, I can actually make games myself. Like, I don't just have to play them. That's actually a job. People are doing this. So that's really interesting to hear you say that as well. Yeah, and then as you mentioned, going to a place that actually has connections with studios and with a lot of these, like even Noman. I know back when I was at Naughty Dog, they had kind of like an internship opportunity with Naughty Dog, and so there would be people where they'd pick, some of the top students at Noman, and they'd go be interns for 6 months or whatever it was over at Naughty Dog. We've been really lucky at Sierra Division Academy to have a lot of people at Naughty Dog and kind of be able to get a few folks through the door for things like that as well. But yeah, what about yourselves, Javier? If you want to share a little bit about your introduction into games and how you made it actually into your first job.
Yeah. It's funny you bring up the whole connection with the like schooling and like studios, because I would say that is definitely a part of how I pretty much got into the industry. So for me, I went the school route. I went to the Art Institute of California, San Diego. Rest in peace. It's no longer a school anymore. So
Yeah.
for those of you, I know me and Jacob went to the same schools, so kind of funny there.
Yeah.
But towards the last year, that's when a class was available called internship. And what was great about where the school was, it was kind of in a primary location near a few different studios around the area. At the time, it was great because the school and the studios had a really great connection where, kind of like what Jacob was mentioning, they would pick the kind of top people that were about to graduate and get them for a small little 9-week internship. And that was pretty much it. From there, the 9 weeks ended, look, basically the class duration, and I kind of just went up to my art director and I was like, "You guys looking for a contract artist?" And it was kind of yeah, just basically that. I went from taking that class and started a contract there. And I was trying to juggle basically graduating my last year while being a contract artist at Sony Online at the time. So yeah, that was pretty much how I got my foot in the door, and the rest is pretty much history. After, well, it's kind of funny because I shipped my first game before I even graduated college. So like for for like my demo reel and stuff like that, I had like the game I had worked on and a few like school projects. But it was nice to have that experience already before I graduated college because it just made it a little bit easier to apply to places and stuff like that. So
Damn.
yeah,
I didn't realize like what was being done at school was actually something that was going into the game. I thought it was just like, oh yeah, here's your fun little project, like but it did not I didn't know it actually
yeah,
made it into the proper release title. That's really cool.
yeah. So it was a lot of juggling. Yeah, yeah, I would just say that. It was just super difficult. Like I personally got kind of discouraged a little bit because, a lot of my classmates at the time were coming out with some awesome portfolio pieces. And I was like, I wish I had more time to work on my personal portfolio. But I knew in the back of my mind, like having like actual ship title is probably a little bit more, important or shows that I have actual like development experience. So I just kind of kept always pushing myself to remember that. But yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of tough if the ship's title itself, though, depending if they actually let you post everything in your portfolio or not. That's maybe uh, a topic of discussion that we can bring up
Yeah,
later. It's like,
absolutely.
does the title on
Absolutely.
your resume carry as much weight as actually having like a really quality portfolio piece that you can show off? Yeah, Miroslav, if you want to jump in as well, I'd be interested to hear. I don't know if I've actually heard your intro into games.
Yeah, so my intro to games was actually kind of funny and kind of weird at the same time. So I got into first I was doing modding for fun, and my friends were like, "Oh, why don't you do this sort of modding for us for like an Arma server back in the day?" And I was like, I was doing skins, I was doing texturing in Photoshop before I even knew that was called texturing. So I was having fun like that, and at one point, YouTube one day randomly recommended me a modeling video, and I just clicked on it. I just was like, okay, I'll watch it. I started watching it, and I was like, okay, I can do this. I looked at the price. I was like, okay, I can't afford Max. I can't afford Maya. The only thing I have is
Yeah.
Blender. I downloaded it, hated it. It was the UI. It was like I couldn't deal with the UI before it was 2.8, so I stopped. And then like 6 months later, 2.8 came out, and then I downloaded it again, and then I gave it another shot. And yeah, I loved it. Ever since then, I've been loving modeling and texturing and yeah, making cool game stuff.
Nice.
Um,
So your background, you didn't actually, yeah, come from formal education or
no,
university.
no,
It
no,
was,
nothing like
yeah.
that. Everything I know is basically either self-taught or just watching people on Discord or just yeah, finding whatever I can to just watch. Same with the stylized stuff. I just kind of watch people do stuff and I pick up bits and pieces.
I think you're the new generation these days because that's pretty much what I've been telling everyone. It's like that there's definitely benefits from going to formal education and university. Mostly a lot of the connections that you make,
Yeah,
or like we talked about, having those schools that actually work with studios that'll help like bring you into them. But outside of that, I think the the balances that you get from the cost and the time investment for that versus just doing it on your own, and then working with others and making the connections through discords and communities and things like that, can bring a lot of what you get from the formal education. Maybe the one of the biggest differences is the motivation behind it, because then you don't have like any skin in the game, with like finishing and actually getting your degree or whatever it is. It's more just that you have to continue to have that self motivation to
yeah,
then finish portfolio pieces and look for work and talk to people that way. So there's pros and cons to each. That's for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
I'll share a little bit about, I guess, my intro into games as well. I don't want to keep going over myself because I'm so interested to hear from what you guys have to say. I don't want to forget to share as well. So, kind of a little bit as what Miro had done before even doing anything in college or high school or anything like that. I had actually started modding on Xbox, so way back for the original Halo, because one of my friends told me that you could make an Xbox play PlayStation games by putting the laser from the PlayStation into the Xbox, and so I basically just broke my Xbox. And then found someone online who could fix it, and they modded it. And then from there, I was like, wow, there's this whole other community and like so many things going on. And that's kind of when I discovered, oh, I can actually make games as well. So then I went to the Art Institute, similar to Javier, and kind of pretty much just passed everything with like the lowest grade possible besides the courses I really cared about. Like, because that's something else. Nobody's really looking at, how many A's did you get or whatever the grading scale is in Europe, 5 stars or something. um, where it's mostly about like, what are you interested in? So environment art, of course, and then how can I study that? Um, Focus on those courses. And I still suck at drawing. I can't do anything with drawing. But then after graduating, I did at least have a couple portfolio pieces I was able to show off, and then got really lucky after applying to like 40 different studios. I heard back from two of them. One of them was like a mobile games company, and the other one was Insomniac Games, but it was just a contract position. So I basically had to consider like stability at the mobile games where I'm full time and I'm like a part of the team, or I can take a contract position at like a really cool studio where I grew up playing Spyro the Dragon. And ultimately, I figure if this company has so much success and they've done these games that are like, global audiences and things like that, there's probably a lot more that I can learn even in this 6 or 9 month contract, compared to going to a mobile game studio where maybe I'm not working on as like high quality of content, and I'll just figure it out after the contract. So I got like a 6 month lease in Los Angeles on an apartment, and then I just worked as hard as I could, did as much overtime as I could, and just tried to show them that they should keep me afterwards. And then got really lucky. They liked me, and I was able to stick around. So when there's those opportunities that, even if they're short term, like internships or contracts or freelance positions with studios, just kind of weight what you might be able to learn from each place, if you're in a position to look at multiple offers and see where you think you could learn the most from, even if it's not as stable. Before I necessarily jump into some of the next stuff, was there anything that we've been discussing so far you guys wanted to touch on a bit more and expand on?
That's right.
Cool.
There's one thing you mentioned about the whole um, I think you brought up the motivation thing in terms of like actually going to university and stuff like that. I think for me, um, I definitely chose the actual schooling route only because of the structure it had. Um, I feel like right now, um, obviously, like I would probably tell someone like, try doing the self-taught route. I do get a lot of people who they jump into that specific area and there's just so much different content and so many different ways to go about it that there's no real way like should I learn texturing first? Should I learn modeling first? Should I learn this and that? So for me, schooling was a great way as like a full structured course on like, hey, let's start off from the very basics all the way to like the most advanced stuff. Cause I know like there's a lot of great resources right now, especially YouTube, but it's just I think some people get overwhelmed with the amount of stuff out there and it's a little bit difficult in that retrospect. But yeah.
No, that's a good point. And actually, funny enough, before the talk, even with you guys beforehand, I was saying I didn't want to go over portfolios too much because I know Jeremy does such a great job with the Dynasty Discord to talk about portfolios and stuff. But even with that sort of area of focus, like what people should be doing, I see it so much that they're just so excited about art and like working on everything that they can, that then they'll have characters in their portfolio and environments and VFX, and they're just like, I want to try a little bit of everything. And that's totally great. Like, I'm not saying don't try everything, because that actually helps you to understand what you're interested in. But as far as like what you put on your portfolio, maybe you don't want to share everything you work on, because then if it's not quite reaching the quality of some of your other pieces, then that's definitely going to hurt when studios and when people are looking at your work to decide, like, is this someone that we want on our team? And maybe they even think like they're not able to focus because there's just so much of everything that you're doing, that then if they hired you for environments, maybe they're worried you're going to like try to jump over to another aspect of the game and just move around a bit. So just keeping that in mind, that if you can find maybe like challenges online, or other communities that have like these kind of monthly challenges, that start working within the field that you're doing to help you maintain that focus and to be able to work on different aspects of texturing or modeling, and kind of focusing on the areas where you feel you're a little bit weaker, then that can also help with your motivation and help you to kind of focus on like certain areas of what you're trying to improve as well. So that maybe that's something interesting.
Just to jump quickly off the topic of motivation, I'm going to throw in a spicy topic here. I feel like what isn't talked about enough is that it's not enough to love games. That can't be your motivation for wanting to work in games. Like, what is it you like about making games that is why you want to work in it? Because, like, I love lots of things, but I'm no good at them. uh, and it's possible to love a thing and be terrible at it. And I'm not saying that's the truth for everybody who wants to work in games, but it is true for some people who want to work in games. And that it's just how it is. We can't be brilliant at all the things we love, but I think like you need to know what it is that is driving you to want to be here. If it's just you want to make amazing art, then great, but does it have to be games? Like, why here specifically? And I think that's something that people don't look critically enough about, is just why exactly they're trying to get to this place that is so difficult to break into at the moment.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And also, like, if anybody has questions while we're talking, please feel free to share them in the Discord and share them in YouTube. But to touch a little bit on that, like, I know so many people where it's an aunt or an uncle or a friend, they'll say like, "Oh, my kid just loves playing video games and they want to make games when they grow up." And like you said, do they actually want to make games, or do they just like games? So making them and liking them is very different. And then also there's so many different aspects to making games, that finding your passion and finding what you actually enjoy doing is very different compared to just playing games and having a lot of fun doing that. So yeah, thanks for mentioning that. Uh, that's something people should consider no matter what they're doing, for their careers, and especially even with artwork itself, if it is that you just like the art aspect of it, or if you like the programming aspect of it, or VFX, or whatever aspect of games you're looking at. There's so many other fields these days that relate to artwork, that even like as Sierra Division, we're doing outsourcing for um, residential, housing, or um, military stuff, or digital twins, which is basically this crazy new thing that if companies want to simulate their technology for warehouses or oil rigs or whatever else, then they can make it in 3D first and understand if like the architecture is going to hold based on where the pillars are, or if your computer is going to be cool enough based on how much airflow is going through at certain things, and all the scientific aspects of it. So if you enjoy a little bit of science and a little bit of art, there's so many different ways that you can use your passion and still find really interesting work throughout many different areas. So yeah, good point. If you really want to work in games though, and like working on God of War or Uncharted or any of these types of games is like the thing that you want to do, uh, then there's still that opportunity for you to break into that. And maybe I can kind of jump around with some of the questions that we have here, and it's a good time to look at working at your dream studio. So when we think about, like I said, yeah, Naughty Dog, Sony Santa Monica, there's so many studios, CD Projekt Red all over the world that people are like, I would just love to work there. Um, First of all, I guess I'll put this to who is this that we have
I
on
think
the
it was me.
question here? Okay, yeah.
It's
So
fine.
Laura,
It sort of relates to what I was just
have
saying,
you
though.
worked at your dream studio, or maybe you could share a bit about that?
So I don't have a dream studio. I have projects that I would love to work on because I'm interested in something about the creation. That's what really inspires me. It's not necessarily the franchise. It's something interesting about how the game is made. Like I would kind of love to work on an Assassin's Creed game, not because I love Assassin's Creed, but because I know that having spoken to some of the devs, they like get loads of old maps and they look at how the cities were built like in the time that they're recreating, and they look at like how the construction was done at those times, and that really fascinates me because I'm a history nerd. So I think there's like a, again, like questioning, why do you want to work for the studios that you really 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 want to work for? And because I can tell you every single studio is on fire, sort of on some level at some time. So like, the places that you think are amazing, they're probably going through something. They're just not like outwardly going through something. Like they will have difficult times, they will have stressful times. Different parts of the project will always, it's a roller coaster if you're working end to end dev. There's like a solid few years where you have no idea what you're making, and then you have a bunch of stuff where it's like, oh my god, now I have to make a game, and then you have a bunch of stress at the end where you're like, now I have to ship a game. And it's, it's finding that thing, like, why do you want to work for this place? And I also feel that it's really sensible to maintain like a lid on that passion, because like if you never achieve it, how is that going to make you feel? I think like find what it is that you love about, or that really excites you about working for a place, and kind of go after that, and go after the experiences and the learning new things, and the like, what are you taking away from the experience, rather than being fixated on the exact thing that you're trying to aim for, is what I would say.
Yeah, and I guess it's almost even kind of sometimes like meeting your heroes in real life, right? Like working at your dream studios. If you really like a celebrity and you get to meet them in person, it can go either way. Maybe you work there, and then all of your dreams are destroyed, and you realize, oh, this is only ever going to be a dream, and it's not at all what I expected. But then maybe you work there, and the people are great, and the project is great, and everything is just as you ever imagined it. So just keep your expectations in mind too, and realize at the end of the day that no matter where you're going, it is still going to be a job. You're going to have deadlines, you're going to have people that maybe are difficult to work with sometimes, you're going to have pieces of artwork or aspects of your project that are going to force you to struggle and like learn new things. So just keep in mind that there's so many different things within the games industry, and without outside of the games industry too, where um, even if you're not your dream studio, you can still have a lot of fun. And maybe it's even worth keeping the games that you love kind of isolated, so you don't work on them and then ruin the magic of it for yourself a bit too. That can be a real thing. What about yourself,
Um,
Javier? Have you ever worked at any of your dream studios?
yeah, I think the dream studio idea has died in my head, like the more years that I'm in the industry, and
Sorry to
like,
laugh.
I and I like kind of continue on the just the career path and stuff like that. Kind of like what you were mentioning, I have this like one specific moment in my career that it kind of all happened was I was at GDC. I was kind of younger, and like you mentioned, I met one of my like heroes, like art, like an artist I really looked up to, who was working at a really like prestigious studio. And I was like asking him all these questions because I was so interested, like what's like working there. And from an outside perspective, you would think like, oh, he's making awesome art, whatever. I talked to him and he's like, I cannot wait to get out of there. I'm like looking for places to leave and stuff like that. And it's like it kind of clicked, like the grass isn't always greener, you know, wherever you think you like would be awesome. It's to me now at this age, it's more important, like the people I get to work with, the projects, like how well they treat you, and just the longevity of like how long can I stay there, right? So um, I think people have these rose-colored glasses when they start somewhere, but then once you get into the real development, like you're mentioning, like there's just so much happening in there with like timelines, crunch, development, like any sort of nuances that, you really start to see the ins and outs of whatever studio that you thought was like, your dream studio from the outside. So it's just something to keep in mind. I think for me now personally, it's just somewhere that will treat me good. And I really love the people I work with. Whenever I would jump somewhere, it was important to me to like, can I continue to grow? Can I continue to learn? And that's still something I definitely look for whenever, you know, uh, looking for a gig or something like that.
With that in mind, when you say continuing to grow and continuing to learn, like as far as I guess working hours too, when it comes to places that you've worked at, and in the industry, like as someone who's constantly looking to better themselves, are you able to do that within just a like a 9 to 5 window, or do you have to do that, outside of work too,
Absolutely.
or
I don't want to like get all like, discourage people, but yeah, I definitely can't do that in the 9 to 5. Like, I always try to work outside, like, just core hours and stuff like that, whether it be just on personal stuff. Because there might be things that are happening outside the industry that you're so isolated in your professional like bubble that you're focused on like their tools, their kind of pipelines. But outside in just like game development, like there's so many new tools coming up. There's so many new processes that are being like introduced from other game studios that you might not even be able to really try out in production, right? So it's always good to look at that sort of stuff. And I'm always like still keeping up to date in Unreal, just because it's like kind of like one of the main engines that is used in game development. A lot of the times when you work inside like your specific studio, they might be using proprietary tools. They might not have the latest and greatest, but it's always good to see what that latest and greatest looks like, because maybe that's an opportunity for you to go back to your team and say like, this is kind of stuff that's being happening outside of production that maybe we can implement or something like that, maybe for the next game or something like that. So it's always nice to just be aware of what's happening, I would say.
Yeah, and honestly, just having some experience with an engine, like even if you're just a prop artist and you're looking to improve your texturing and your modeling, you have to render it somewhere, and then once you end up going to a studio, most likely you're going to have to be the person who implements those props, and especially as an environment artist, then you're going to need to learn materials, application, even maybe a little bit of lighting and world building. And the more engines that you're able to work in, then, as you said, you're also going to know maybe there's a really cool tool in this engine, or a really cool tool in this engine that then you can even present ideas and hopefully improve whatever proprietary engines the studios might be using, or tech artists that can help create new tools for the Unreal Engine. Like I still think about some of the amazing tools we had with the Fox engine over at Kojima. Like
Yeah,
at that
I
point, I
know.
think it was still like UE3, or what's the other one? There was even something before Unreal, but
UDK.
yeah, yeah, UDK. There it is. Yeah, there's still tools that I wish I had from those engines back then. And if you have a great team of people and you have really talented programmers and tech artists, then they can create those tools sometimes for you and implement that stuff. So getting that opportunity to try, Unity and Unreal and Godot and some of these other engines that are popping up, you may know things and see workflows that other people hadn't even thought of, just because you have that different experience with those things. What about yourself, Miroslav, as far as like, you know, working on the coolest project that you ever could versus just working with the coolest people that you ever could? Is there something like that you've seen throughout your career that kind of makes you a bit happier in your day to day and makes you feel like what you're doing is more purposeful, or you wake up feeling good going to work and it's not just like, oh shit, another another asset today.
Yeah. I think it's always fun to have a project that you're very excited about. Something that like you really want to work on and you have fun working on it. But at one point, that project is going to come to an end. So for me, I prefer, like, if I can have both, then perfect. Otherwise, I prefer definitely working with people that I can get along with, and I can make jokes and we can have fun. We can play cool party games, stuff like that. Like, to me, that's much more exciting and fun to do versus the project. Because the project will end, like I said, and then you'll be searching for something else to excite you.
You can't
Yeah,
always work
yeah,
on projects that you love, depending on what the studio is making at the time, right? As well,
Yeah,
it's like you have to
exactly.
find something about it that you like, even if it's not the most exciting project. But like the people will be the constant. Like I literally yesterday, one of my friends was like, "I'm so jealous of the working relationship that you have with your people that you work with. Like it seems that you all get along so well together. You all have a really great time together." And that is the one constant, like when things are a little bit rubbish or when your day is being a bit rough, like there are these wonderful people around you, and it's that like is kind of the worthwhile thing a lot at the end of the day.
yeah. I would completely agree with that, because then um, I don't want to necessarily just exactly echo what Javier said, but the dream studio is kind of dead to me in some ways. Where, you know, we got the chance to work on Metal Gear Solid, and we got the chance to work on Uncharted, and at the end of the day, as Miroslav said too, like the projects that you're on are really cool, and it's great because it does make you excited to wake up to work on those things. But then if the people that you're next to, you're not able to learn from them, or it's not easy to talk to them, then that totally changes things as well. And especially having good management is a huge one. Like if you're lucky to have a lead or a boss or an art director that actually listens, then that's a really big deal. And my experience at NVIDIA is kind of a good balance of that, where maybe the projects weren't as fun. Like, not only, okay, so we did get to work on like really cool future tech and, super high quality, detailed artwork and things like that. But then it's shown behind Jensen for 30 seconds or a minute, and then nobody ever sees it again. So you don't get the fulfillment from those projects. But then the people around me there, like we would meet up all the time, and we would just sometimes hop on calls and work and just like laughing the whole time. My boss was great there, and I was able to offer suggestions and ideas, and I always felt heard and felt like I was like a part of the team. And so that's the only reason I even stayed 5 years there, because otherwise I'm just working on like a robot, and like it's kind of boring. So with that in mind, looking back at other studios where I maybe stayed only a year and a half, even though it was the coolest project I'd ever been a part of, I stayed at NVIDIA for 5 years, because then the people there were just some of the best people I worked with. And so at the end of the day, if you're working with great people, hopefully you can work on a cool project, but you have a lot more fun, at least when the people around you are just almost your friends at a certain point. To jump around a little bit further, and also talk about maybe this idea of 9 to 5 versus how much time do you have to put in after work in order to actually grow your skills and things like that, um, and talk about passion to profession, as the title of this talk is. uh, Miroslav, I would ask, like, you know, when does passion become obsession? Or like, should a 3D artist put extra hours in to build your skills and portfolio after you go to work? And how does that affect, mental health and lifestyle and all these types of things like that?
Yeah. Um, I think there is a balance. I think it's okay if you want to push yourself a little bit, um, to create art past your work hours. That's perfectly fine. But I think like everything, there is a balance. Like just like chocolate, you can eat a bit of chocolate, but you can't just eat chocolate all day, every day. So
Watch
it's
me.
exactly. No, I think there's definitely a balance to it. I think for everyone that balance is gonna be at different places. Some people can sustain pushing themselves for a while without feeling any burnout or without feeling fatigue, while some people just can't really do that. And I don't think there's a wrong answer specifically. I think it's just whatever you feel, because at the end of the day, you have to think about this long term. Because if you want this to be a career that's going to be many years, you have to remember there's going to be burnout. There might be like a lot of fatigue and certain times when you have art block where it just won't work. So you have to like space it out, give yourself time to rest, uh, give yourself time to recover so that you can come back and make some super sick art again.
Do you feel at the same time though, that when you first started a course, maybe there's like a lot more of that passion, that drive to push forward, that
Oh,
putting in those
yeah.
extra hours in the beginning kind of was almost necessary for
Oh,
you
yeah,
to
yeah,
find work?
definitely. For me, especially because I'm self-taught, I didn't have the knowledge that everyone else usually would get from universities and stuff. So I had to like watch tons of videos. I had to search a poly count, like hundreds of tutorials, all kinds of content. And in order for me to also catch up, because I wanted to get good pretty fast, so I had to basically from morning to night just do 3D. That was basically my life for like I think the first year and a half. And then after that, once I started seeing that I was getting somewhere, I started to slow down a little bit so I could have, enjoyment again, like starting to play games. Because for me, especially as a game artist, I need to play games. I have to like actually enjoy that. So going back to
Yeah.
that is much more fun.
Yeah, so I guess it's kind of like you said, it really depends where you're at in your mental state as to whether or not you even can push past those 9 to 5 hours. And if you should do something afterwards, you kind of have to listen to your body or your lifestyle or what's happening at the time, whether or not you should put in that extra time. And if you have that drive, and if you're just like so excited to be able to, learn this new trim texture technique or something else, that then, all right, do it, go for it, like enjoy the
Yeah,
time. But there's that other aspect where some artists maybe feel like I have to do this, and that kind of weight that you have on top of you to see the others around you posting new artwork and sharing new things in their portfolio, and you feel like, oh man, I'm not doing anything. And then you kind of go on a downward spiral, because then not only are you not doing overtime after work, but then you're just feeling shit about it, and it kind of just like that's
yeah, it's a
almost when
spiral.
I feel like the burnout can start with that, comparing yourself to others too. um, have you ever been through a burnout, Laura? Sorry, I'm just throwing the question out there. I don't want to be a sensitive subject, but
I've definitely worked on things where I was like working really, really intensely for really long periods of time. But the way that I kind of deal with that is I just have other things. Like, and this is something I say to people. It's like, be a whole person. Don't let art or games just be the only thing that you do, because like when that's burning you out, when that's stressing you out, where do you go? Like, have, I don't know, friends, like board games, like walk your dog, go outside. Like I literally mean this, because like it's good for your mental health, and it's good for yourself. Like, you only get one shot at this life, right? Like, if we're going to chain ourselves to a computer all day, is that all you want to achieve, really? And I think there's ways to to push your skills and to push your knowledge without being sat at a desk. Like, I don't know what it's like necessarily in other parts of the world, but like museums in the UK are often free. Like, you can go and learn things. Like, you can pick up new hobbies relatively cheaply that will enhance your skills. Like, if you're a character artist, so it will teach you how fabric fits together and how it drapes and how it moves and how the folds kind of work. If you're an environment work, look at the architecture, like look at the world around you, like go for a walk in a forest. Like, there's so many more things that are good for you as a person that will also enhance your art. And I think that's really important, and how having that balance, like you say, balance will help you find what works best.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's even something I still struggle with because I'm like work hard, play hard usually. So, I'll just bust ass for like 5 years and just put all my time into something, and then just totally just die and like burn out and not want to work anymore. And then, as you said, just go into the forest and disappear for a while. But then you find something that ignites your passion, and still kind of going back and forth on that. I think I'm getting better at it, but it's a real thing for sure, and especially starting out. It is so important to put that extra time in and to like learn what it is that you're doing and to understand your craft to be able to be one of the people that has a standout portfolio, and you do get recognized for it. But then you know, it's like almost like running a marathon. I haven't done it. Maybe I've done like, half a marathon or something, but I imagine it's like running a marathon where you've put all this time in and you've trained so hard for it, that then you also need that rest. Like, I think there's like a 2 week period, or however long it is that you're supposed to rest after doing such an intense activity, to be able to let your muscles recover and everything come back from that. So if you are putting all this time into that in the beginning when you're first starting out and working on challenges and doing portfolio pieces, and then you get your job, it's okay after you're working to just be able to like not post anything in your portfolio for a while and not have to go home and work on new artwork. You can learn while you're at the studio and learn from the people around you, and try to do that within the time that you're just at work and not have to keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing. Like, try to find that balance from there. um we do actually have a question from Aquino Designs. He's asking, is it possible for a self-taught artist to enter the industry in a specialized role like shaders and materials? Should I try to generalize more to make up for things I may lack from a formal education? Maybe Javier, coming from a materials background, this is a good one for you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I get that a lot actually. It's interesting because now there are definitely specialized roles where it's just someone working on shaders, someone working on materials. Back when I started, everyone was kind of doing a little bit of everything. I think the most successful people that I work with, or the most successful people that are self-taught and are trying to become shader or texture artists, have a little bit of background or knowledge on just environment art as a whole, because they know where shading and materials actually fit into the entire pipeline. So they know how the textures work with props. They know how the textures work with like any sort of like terrain textures or anything like that. But there's like a specific part that they know. Whereas there's been people who literally are only in designer, and they can create really awesome like things in designer, really nice portfolio renders. But how does it fit in an actual production? Where do these actual textures go in? Like, can you implement them into a shader in our proprietary engine? Does it look good next to everything else in the environment? So I feel like with shading and texture artists, they almost get isolated into this bubble of like, if I make really cool sphere renders, that's all I need. But ideally, it's all about how is it integrated into the game as a whole, because it's just not one little part. It's like you're adding to like a huge specific, thing when it comes into production. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because then even if you're making a tiling texture as a material artist and you've never yourself put a tiling texture on like a landscape or on a large
Yeah.
wall, and start to understand what repetition looks like and how to avoid that, and the different types of like layering systems and vertex painting and
Yep.
decals and these things that you can use to kind of cheat the system and make those things look good, then it's going to be difficult for you as a material artist to know the best way and the best types of materials to create for your team. So that's a great point to kind of consider all these things like that. Actually, Jeremy has provided quite a few questions that we've gotten from different locations. Um, and something that might be good to talk about that, Laura, I know you mentioned you want to discuss as well. Uh, from Curious Antics, they're wondering, what do you guys think of the current situation in the industry compared to when you started? And then kind of adding on to that as it relates to, layoffs and saturation of games. And like, there's so many different topics that nowadays are quite a bit of a hot topic that it might be good to just open that up and discuss it and kind of make it something that's not taboo to discuss.
It's so difficult to know where to start with that topic because it's ginormous, really, isn't it? Like, I mean, obviously layoffs are just a part of life now, it feels like, and every time I think it's getting better, then Microsoft lays off another 3,000 people or something. Like, it does feel crazy. But I feel like what has shifted is that when I started out in games, it was very much like taboo almost. Like, it wasn't like, ooh, like, people that work in games are like sweaty men in their mom's basement type vibe, like, which obviously wasn't true, but it had that, like, that perception of it. And that isn't the case at all. And I don't think it has ever truly been the case. But now that games has become more in the mainstream and more accessible to people, and people do have all these online resources, and like you can just kind of pick it up and teach yourself, like there's been an influx of people who are like, oh, I really want to work on this. This looks amazing. I'm so excited to work in this industry. And then at the same time, you've got universities, certainly in the UK, who are capitalizing on this, going, oh, people can pay me lots of money, so I'm going to put together these courses. And then you end up with a situation where like the courses aren't very good. And then you've got people who come out of them and they've spent thousands of pounds. I'm not making this sound good. This is just the situation as it is. People have spent thousands of pounds on education, and they end up with a degree that isn't going to get them a job. And like maybe the universities haven't been truthful with them about the quality of what it is they're producing. They're just bums on seats, and universities certainly over here are overwhelmed. Like, teachers are hugely stressed. They're completely underfunded, and so teaching isn't necessarily always of the quality that it needs to be. And that is just the sad truth, unfortunately, in the UK. Like, there are definitely places that are better, but we're seeing loads more people trying to break into the industry. B, loads of people being laid off because there was a boom during COVID when money was really cheap, and now the funding has bottomed out of the industry. People entering into education that isn't going to serve them, and then maybe they're expecting a job at the end of it, but they're then like, why haven't I got a job when I have loads of debt now? And it's like this horrible melting pot. And like, I'm not sure I see the other side of it, to be quite honest. I don't that there's nothing positive to take away from that. I'm really sorry, but that's kind of like my read on the situation of what's been happening over kind of the last few years. I don't know if there's anyone that can make it sound any better.
Yeah, I guess like there's been a couple things that I've seen with a lot of the layoffs. I mean, of course, first of all, it's a terrible thing. So many people are going through it, and it's so difficult to see like friends that I had worked with in the past, and people that like I've always really admired their portfolios and their artwork to have been let go from studios. It's not even uh, at a point right now where it's like you're not good enough. It's just like you happen to be really unlucky that you're at a place that has gone through a layoff, and that totally sucks, because then there's really nothing you can do about it. Um, with that in mind, I guess there's this idea of, back in the day, you would work at a larger studio, Sony or Microsoft, and that was almost like the stability compared to an indie studio, where at an indie studio, you don't know if the project's going to succeed, you don't know how long it's going to be around for, but it almost kind of feels like it's shifted a little bit, where so many of the folks that have been let go that I've seen they'll even start up their own studios and like start new projects. And there's been a lot of success that I've seen from so many of these, not necessarily even indie studios, but like double A studios, or kind of this in between, where they don't have to invest such large sums of money for these GTA sized games. And you just make something fun that people are enjoying, and it's not market researched where they're working on something that they had all these people play test and they think it's going to be fun because this character can do this activity that you saw in another game that made a ton of money. But it's just people that are really passionate, and people that are working again on the projects that got them into games in the first place. And so there's kind of a little bit of this reset that I'm seeing in the industry. And to a point, it's good that that's starting to pop back up, and that success is coming into the hands of the developers themselves more, and not necessarily in like the big corporations' hands. But it is still really jarring for so many people, and really difficult to then just have everything change right in front of your eyes. You have to go through kind of a reset. But a lot of the folks I've talked to also take that kind of downtime after going through a layoff. And it's not a blessing per se, but when you're working day in day out, there's not really any of us that ever think like, I'm just going to take 4 months off and see what I want to do with the next few years of my life. And there's that opportunity that you kind of get if you get severance and you get pay after being laid off, where you're forced to kind of do that. And it makes you step back and think like, am I still passionate about games? Am I happy with doing this? Do I want to try going somewhere else? Maybe I want to be a chef, or maybe I want to be like a dog walker, or whatever it is that you are interested in. That for their actual lifestyles, it's been a positive thing in the long run, even if in the short term, it's a really difficult thing to face. So I don't know if that's a positive outlook from it, but there's definitely some positives I've seen from people, for
You're
sure.
definitely right with the indie companies like re-emerging. Like, we've seen it just recently with, okay, yes, Double Fine just had layoffs, but they had just reclaimed their independence. And it's happened with studios in the UK as well, where these big conglomerates that own loads and loads of companies, or loads and loads of studios, and can just cut them at will. Like, actually, like being indie, I think it's difficult, but you make your own luck. Whereas like you're not reliant on some bigwig in like a completely different country trying to like appease their shareholders. Like, it might be difficult to raise your own funding, but at least you get to make what you want in the style that you want it, that you're passionate about, that it hasn't been like, oh, can you please fulfill this tick box in our company portfolio? Like, yeah,
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
it's definitely the way it's shifting.
Man, there's so many more things I'd want to cover. We're getting pretty close to the end here, but then I don't know how much longer Jeremy will let us go for. Uh, Maybe we can just briefly touch really quickly on some of the differences between U.S. studios and European studios, and then also kind of conclusions as to some advice that we can depart with giving people looking to break into the industry. I guess if I just share a couple things that I've seen, because right now I'm actually in Finland. I work remote, and I'm really lucky to have my own studio. I wasn't, part of like a layoff to start my own studio, but uh, the aspects of life in Europe kind of make it a lot easier to move this way versus people coming from Europe moving to the US. So if your dream studios are, in Los Angeles or New York or San Francisco, having a license to drive a car is almost like a necessity, because public transport's not really a thing in the US. Your healthcare system is totally different. The amount of time off that you get is much less compared to Europe. Maybe I could hear a couple positives, Laura, from your side, as far as like in the UK, what you really like about the country, and what you like about like the studios that are within the UK, from your knowledge of like what's different compared to the US.
I have always been blessed with a very short commute to work. I live in a place of the UK where we cycle a lot, and so my commuting has always been by cycling, like whether it's 10 minutes, 20 minutes or something. And I love that, being able to kind of build like active travel into my life. I think, if you're in the UK and maybe you have to drive like an hour to get to your place of work, because everything is so much more spread out, right? Like in the UK certainly, and in Europe, everything tends to be a lot more closer together, so you can get places a lot more easily. I think our public transport links are definitely better, not necessarily cheaper, unfortunately, but there are definitely ways of getting around that are free and healthy, and that's really great. Like, I've also been able to walk to work, and that's been also really awesome. We do get more holiday. It tends to vary slightly. We have a number of like national holidays, which are on top of our like company holidays, which is really great. We tend to have other company benefits. It depends where you work, but companies will generally add stuff like, maybe there'll be like extra health insurance in addition to obviously the National Health Service, which we have in the UK, which is free. Or they'll add like gym memberships or stuff like that. Oh, there's another thing that just popped into my head. We get sick pay as well. I don't know if that's a thing in the US, but if you are ill, then you get paid to be off work, which is nice. And that can extend to like long-term sick pay, which comes from the government actually, but will be like, if you're like really ill for an extended period of time, then you will be supported in that. So I think there's probably more state support than there is in the US generally.
Yeah, I think at one of the studios I was at, we had like 6 days of sick time. So if you're sick longer than 6 days,
That's a
then
bad flu. Like,
you gotta
yeah.
figure it out. Yeah. Well, the main reason I want to bring that up is because I know so many people are interested in the studios that are in the U.S., uh, but then maybe they're not quite aware of how difficult it is to get in, because then in that situation, usually having a degree is more important to actually get green cards or to get visas and things. So that's a situation where it could really benefit to have gone to proper education and get a university degree from that. But then also just so many folks in Europe I know don't have a license. Like, that's not something that they've ever needed in life. And so if you're looking to go to the US, then that's kind of something that's necessary. But it's just things to keep in mind too, where coming back to the Dream Studio thing, it's not even necessarily just the project and just the people, but it's also the place that you're living, the environment that you have to actually get to work. My drive was an hour long when I lived in Los Angeles, just because then the price of living, the cost of living, I had to live that far away just to be able to like afford the apartment that I was in, to then travel all the way across the city to go work there. Um, yeah, I think that's at least a little bit of a brief insight to some of the differences. It would be nice to dive into that topic a bit further, but I know we're coming up on the end here already. And just for people to keep in mind, maybe um, there's still opportunities sometimes for remote work. I know some folks even in the UK, some of the instructors at Sierra Division Academy are working for That's No Moon, which is like a Los Angeles based studio, but then they're in the UK doing that. And so that's a really lucky chance if you're able to work remote. Uh, Working from home's in a whole nother topic. We could go on for another hour with all the different things in the industry, just as far as breaking into the industry. Once you're there, how do you navigate moving up in your career and things like that? But with all that in mind, and with our vast experience having worked at so many different places and coming from so many different backgrounds, maybe Javier, you could share what one piece of advice would be that you'd want to offer people now looking to break into the industry, and how they can get their foot into the door.
Yeah, I would definitely say for me, I know this is going to sound cliche and they've probably heard it 100 times, but it's definitely just like keep your network open and network as much as possible. I think right now, more than anything, networking is super important, even more so than probably your portfolio, just because there are certain jobs that are hidden behind like, the careers page that might be internal that you might not even see. So it's always nice to have friends on the inside who, they could refer you or maybe like get you in the door before this like listing goes public or something like that, right? If you're trying to apply to a certain studio or something like that. Or it could, I've even had like instances where like maybe they can tell you a few months in advance, like, hey, we're going to be looking for, certain people in a few months that, the normal people who are just scrolling through careers pages might not even know, have that information, right? So yeah, just keeping your network open, and yeah, talk to as many devs as possible. I think we all need to support each other right now more than anything.
Yeah, there's so many great communities. I mean, if you're watching this, you're probably part of the Dynasty community, which has been a huge one. I know Miroslav's laughing because like that's actually where we found Miroslav to bring him on for Sierra Division was through the Dynasty Discord. We've got like our own Discord at Sierra Division where we have challenges and people taking mentorships and taking courses. Can also talk to others looking to improve their skills. I know. Actually, Laura, I think you said that you host a few events as well. If you want to give a shout out to any of those real quick, and then we can pass it off to Jeremy.
Yeah, I run an event called Gamebridge. It's based in Cambridge in the UK. It's every June. So if anyone is based in the UK and you're interested, then keep an eye out next year. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Like, this is a really fun talk. I appreciate all you guys like sharing all this. Maybe there's a couple questions that if we have time afterwards, we can talk to Jeremy and try to answer some of these questions to people individually. But yeah, thanks so much again, guys. Laura, Javier, Miroslav, you'll have to post your art stations in the Dynasty Discord so people can find you after this. But until next time, thanks everyone and take care. I'll pass it off to Jeremy from here.
Yo, hello. Okay, dude, wild. Yeah, that hour went by super fast.
Yeah.
But I really appreciate you guys taking the time to just kind of have these discussions, especially some of the tougher ones. When it comes to those questions that we haven't gotten answered, I have them listed out so I can link them to you guys. And if we do find the time to answer them, which I don't want to put these guys on the spot to try and do that, I'll make sure that they go into the description of the YouTube video when it does go live. And yeah, but dude, really, really nice talks, really good discussion. And also I'm an Art Institute alumni as well from Seattle.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, okay.
Yeah, thanks for putting this together, Jeremy.
Yeah, of course.
Really
Thank you again,
appreciate
guys.
what you do for the whole game dev community.
It's a joy, an addiction even.
Yeah.
All right, thank you guys. I'll talk to you guys later.
Thank you.
Peace.
Okay. All right, good stuff. Now that they've all left the call, I'll take a break here and just like help the next speaker get all set up, and then we can figure out how we get the next one kicked off. I will talk to you guys soon. I think I need to put the music back on. Let's see if it'll kick in. Okay, hello. So the next talk, the final talk for the evening, is we're going to be talking with Hugh, who's going to be talking about surface stacking and building smarter, more modular materials in engine. It's honestly a topic I find very close to me, and I think it's something we should all kind of be looking at. So I'll let you take over, Hugh.
Awesome. Yeah. Hi, my name is Hugh Chew. I'm a staff material artist. The panel we're going to talk about is going to be surface stacking, building smarter, more modular materials in engine. Just a little bit about myself, just so some of you who don't know who I am kind of know what my background is. I have now just hit my 10th year in the industry, so decade, woo. But I started off, went to the Art Institute of Los Angeles, RIP. There I, went into a bunch of different things, like if I want to be a character artist, materials, environments, mostly focused on environments and materials. I got my first role as a associate tech artist at Infinity Ward, where I got to work on Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. Mostly it was just auditing materials and making sure everything was up to a PBR compliance, basically. But from there, it was a very short contract. So then I jumped over to Sledgehammer Games, where I worked briefly on the Zombies team for World War II. Again, good thing. Did a lot of optimization stuff, but realistically was not kind of where I was kind of fitting well with. So I left. I spent a brief year at a company called House, which does furniture, which I did a lot of material scanning for them. That's where I really got more focused into doing materials. But then from there, I worked at Sinzaro Games for about 4 to 5 years, working on Marvel Powers United, Asgard's Wrath 1 and 2. And then for about 3 years after that, I was working at PlayStation Studios Visual Arts. Got to work on The Last of Us Part 1, really great project to work on. Got to work on Concord, RIP to that one. But both great projects to work on. I also got to work on a project with Bend, but fortunately that was canceled very much after Concord. But again, I would hope that some of that stuff gets to see the light of day one of these days. But besides my professional background, I also do teaching. I taught at CG Master Academy, RIP to that one, where I taught shaders and textures. I currently teach at Laguna College of Art and Design and the Academy of Art, where I focus mostly on environments, materials, and shader tech. And then I also do YouTube as well, where I started posting more kind of generalized tutorial content, especially for optimization purposes. So if you guys have not already checked it out, here are all my socials here. You can always find me there. I'm honestly one of the best guys that you can always ask questions to. I'll always try and answer as best I can. But for the agenda for this panel, we're going to demonstrate and discuss what is material layering, aka surface stacking. And we're going to talk about how it differs from our standard legacy method of texture authoring. And what I mean is, when we're first taught how to texture, the idea is that we do all of our texturing in a DCC program, and then we bring that into a game engine. But the problem is that after we get that into the engine, we can't really do anything after. So we're going to focus on what was the legacy workflow, kind of what were the pros and cons to that. Then we're going to go over material layering as a workflow. We'll talk about example productions that have actually used this in many different ways. This is something that's been around for many, many years. We'll go over, again, pros and cons for the optimization side of things. We'll walk through a Unreal Engine project that I've set up for things, and then we'll just gather some final thoughts and answer some questions after. So the standard texturing workflow that we have typically been taught is we model something, we UV it, we bring it into our game engine, and then we texture it in a DCC program, whether it's Quixel, Dedo, Photoshop, Substance, 3D Paint, 3D Coat, whatever. We do all the texturing there, and that's usually about it. And that's kind of where we have a bit of a problem, because when we get it into this whole process, we can't do anything else after. We can apply extra textures and things on top of it, but realistically, there's not much else we can do. Like, there's no real way for us to reuse that. Like, that gun that I had just shown is a very bespoke asset. You can't just reuse the same textures for that particular gun unless maybe you have another gun of a same, silhouette, basically. But the problem wherein lies is you can only do like a few things, whether it's some basic color tinting with like a simple texture mask, or applying detail textures, essentially extra textures that could be a cheap tileable normal map, a cheap tileable ambient occlusion map, or just anything else we can kind of overlay on it. The problem in lies is that we're adding extra textures to try and solve a solution to something that doesn't have to be a part of that problem. And, this is something we've done for many, many years, especially since like at the 7th generation of games, we went from having just only focused on albedo textures to now starting to get more spec, gloss, bump maps, normal maps. That's what we had to deal with then. But that was the 7th generation. That was PlayStation 3. We're now in the 9th generation, hopefully sometime soon going to the 10th generation of games. We can't keep doing this because games are getting much more larger and much more complex. And that's where we start to see these technical bottlenecks. So here is some various assets that were made in that legacy bespoke workflow. These are from the original Last of Us on the PlayStation 3. Again, the pipelines that we're taught for asset creation, no matter what kind of discipline, whether you're a prop, environment, character artist, run into this big bottleneck. We get longer productions, longer development time. Ooh, sorry, let me go back on that. Sorry. It's not the most fun to deal with, but hey, we'll get that taken care of. But yeah, we have larger levels, open world concepts, especially is like a newer, larger thing that we have to deal with. We have to provide much more complex and robust shaders. You always see people talking about how, hey, why can't I shoot every single fruit on this fruit stand for this one particular game? Why can't I touch the water in this particular game? We have to get to a much higher level of fidelity that we didn't have back then to deal with. And of course, performance. And the performance isn't as easy as it used to be. And it's not just like, hey, I'm going to, make my PlayStation 4 version, or I'm going to make my Xbox version. We have various versions within those platforms. We have like a high performance mode. We have a high fidelity mode where one could be 60 FPS at 1080p, or we can have 4K at 30 FPS. There's also like the two different Xbox series. There is the Pro series for PlayStation. So we have various different kinds of platforms that we have to try and optimize specifically to. So things have gotten a lot more complex with these newer and newer generations that we've had to deal with. So again, this is what we have to expect for the 9th generation of games. We have our standard implementations of what we can try and do to help with optimization, aka LODs, bitmaps, level loading, aka that little thing in games where you have to kind of crawl through a crack to kind of get to the next level. That's the secret way of trying to get you from one level to the next. Of course, texel density, that's a real big one that we always have to deal with. That's not just an optimization thing, but also a kind of quality level check to make sure your textures look good fidelity-wise. And then, of course, we have texture channel packing. Now, some of the expert stuff that we've started to see more, especially with the newer generation of Unreal Engine, is Lumen, Nanite, virtual textures, and AI upscaling, which the good kind, not the bad kind. But here's the kind of quality bar we had to hit. We had two different versions of the same game, but running at completely different FPSs and different aspect ratios, essentially. One at 4K, one at 1080p resolution. They also want no load screens. You know, back in the day, we had to wait for Skyrim to reload every single thing, so it would take a while. They want HDR, so they want full color resolution. They want real-time shadows, real-time reflections, full PBR textures, as in accurately rendered textures within the lighting environment. And of course, we have larger poly counts. Games can't be made in 250, polygons anymore. We have to actually have more than just millions. Even, I swear, GTA 6 might be billions of polygons. I'm just sweating thinking about it. But here's what you actually see when we have these problems. So here is the game Black Myth Wukong. You see that some of the assets here are not loading the full texture resolutions. And a lot of it can be because of LODs or MIP mapping. This type of kind of UVE resolution that we're having an issue with typically comes from the fact that the game is having a hard time trying to run the full VRAM of the asset. And so it has to rely on the previous bitmaps until it can load the proper one first. So we're running into a VRAM bottleneck because there's probably too many textures that are kind of taking up the full budget of VRAM for your game. But here's the thing. The rules have changed. We don't have to bake down every single detail anymore. We don't have to necessarily bake maps, in that we don't have to always, take a high poly, make a mid poly, or make a low poly. We can actually start to shift on relying on more polygons and less amount of textures. What I mean is, when you have a chance to look at a asset, say you make an asset that's 100,000 triangles. Look at the file size of that one asset that's 100,000 triangles. It's most likely like 5 megabytes. Do you know what texture, like how many textures cost 5 megabytes? Typically 1K resolution texture, depending on what kind it is. So one single texture costs as much as 100,000 triangles, which in the 8th generation of games at the PS4 era, a hero character had 100,000 triangles. So that's kind of where you need to see that, like, hey, we can now actually hit a higher quality of geometry, and using better optimization techniques, we can actually have it so that we don't have to use as many textures. So here, a single 1K texture costs roughly about the same memory as a 27K triangle mesh, which changes how we think about asset construction. So instead of baking down everything, we rely less on the textures, but on the meshes themselves. Now, here is kind of how this layering workflow is handled. You have a bunch of these tileable materials, and you just quickly overlay them on a bit of geometry. But you're handling the masking, you're handling the parameters, you're handling everything through the UI of the engine itself. You can change it on the fly in engine. That's one of the cool things about this workflow. It's not that you're kind of stuck at what you made before you brought it in. You can keep going with it. And now here is kind of a general overview of that. So now we can model in UV, most likely to a mid poly asset, not a low poly or high poly asset. You can bake if you want to. In this case, you could probably bake like a normal map or an ambient occlusion map that is for the asset itself. Then you import all your assets into Unreal Engine, and then you can texture and kind of set up all your materials directly with tileables inside of the engine itself. Here's a quick little kind of video demonstration of what this looks like. So you see that I'm going in here. This is the UI for material layering within Unreal Engine. So you start off with a basic layer material, which is the wood. Then you can go in here. You can change any sort of parameter that you set up in the material itself. You can toggle on or off like wear and tear. You can change the color of things. You can rotate. You can do whatever you want. Then as you start to add layers, you slowly choose what kind of material you want to replace, and you choose what kind of masking component that you want to use with this. So as you slowly start going, you can toggle on and mask out more and more of different types of metals or other different types of assets. And then you can overlay like extra details from like baked assets or baked details from ZBrush or just anything you tend to make inside of like your other DCC programs. But that's how we can handle this. What's cool is you can go through any one of these now and make those changes on the fly right after. So here's kind of an example of what the two workflows kind of look like side by side. Your standard workflow, you have many different factors to choose from your texture resolution. So say we're working within a certain type of texel density. Depending on the project you're working on, it could be 512 per 1 meter. It could be 1024 per 1 meter. So depending on if it's like a first person game or a third person game, you would typically have to kind of choose that right off the bat. If you work in VR, that's actually much, much higher actually, because you have to actually get closer than you would with a first person game. Or if you work like in an RTS type of workflow, you'd actually use less texel density. But you typically will have a uniquely textured asset. In this case, we're actually already channel packing, but some places they don't channel pack. So you might have full 5 to 6 textures. So at 1K with just these 4 textures alone, that's 10 megabytes. At 2K resolution, you'd have 40 megabytes. 4K, which, hey, some people, they think that that's the right way to go. 160 megabytes of data. That's a lot to have. Like if you really look at how much geometry you could replace with 160 megabytes of data, you would probably be able to swap out a ton of stuff. But again, that's the problem. This asset, like this couch, is only good for this couch. Whereas if we move to the layered material workflow, there's only 2 tileable materials I'm working with. I have a wood and I have a leather. I can break down and have other things of like micro or macro texturing, some baked textures, an ID mask, a null map that I've generated, even channel packed masks for edge wear, dirt, full damage, with just the tileable textures themselves, which in this case I don't use the null map because I'm using more geometry, so I don't have to worry about things like tessellation or parallax occlusion. I've now run up at a 512 resolution, 3 megabytes. Plus all these extra macro textures that I've generated from, say, the normal map ID channel packing and that's 8 megabytes. That's over with a 1K resolution and a 512 resolution, 14 megabytes of data for just this one asset. And what's cool is I can reuse those tileable materials that I've just made. So in a VRAM sense, the textures are already being referenced. You can reuse them again. If you have a tileable material that needs wood, a tileable material that needs leather, a tileable material that needs whatever else, it can be reused over and over again. Here's kind of part of an example from The Last of Us Part 1 where you can see that they are using this trim texture with a kind of varnished wood material, but they're using it for different 3D assets, tables, even some of the architecture. By being able to reuse this stuff over and over again, we can start to slowly remove the need for all of these extra bespokely made assets. Now, again, like I mentioned earlier, this actually has been something that's been around for a very, very long time. Epic had been working on it with Paragon, though their workflow was not using the kind of layered UI. They were actually handling some of their materialing using material functions. And then they would try and just, bring in some assets from Substance Painter for masking purposes. We use it a lot in Last of Us. We use it for mostly like surface layering. So whatever surface that you see like in any of the renders from The Last of Us, most likely is using tileables that we have layered together within some of our internal programs. Firewalk and Concord, I work directly with a lot of the teams there. We use a lot of tileables, layered materials, and other extra things we can do kind of on top of it. And recently, as I was been doing some more research, I actually found that Ready at Dawn had worked on this for the Order 1886 back in 2013. They actually, just kind of as a quick little example, had a budget memory of 2 gigabytes of textures. Can you imagine, like, again, this is on early, 8th generation PS4 era. 2 gigabytes of texture information, 700 megabytes of level geometry, 600 megabytes for character textures, any other type of global UI, light maps, FX, and then 700 megabytes for like animation. So that's like a very small amount of VRAM to have to deal with the PS4. But just knowing that this game had, and even today, it still looks very good for its time. They used a layering workflow where you can have copper, rusted copper, You can have dirt, grime, water, all of these different things layered together for a single asset. There still, again, is uniquely made textures because you can see that there's some bespoke type of details like these weld marks. But you can even just as easily in our new workflow just use either mesh decals or even floating decals. For most of their actual layering for their environment assets, they used 4 layers for most cases. It was everything was driven by vertex color and it was composited per layer. Their workflow used for environment art 512 per unit, which is 512 per 1 meter of physical space. For standard tiling, they would actually author at 1024 and then just lower the resolution down. That's what most studios tend to actually do. But given that this game came out in 2013 and it's been 13 years, or 13 years at this point now, it's something that it's not taught as much as I would like to see, but it's great so that people know that this workflow has been around for a very long time and that we have seen really great results with that. You can have great looking games with the lack of bespokely made assets. Now, what are these pros and cons for material layering? Again, as a caveat to say, you don't have to use this workflow. You don't have to use the bespoke workflow. It's going to depend on the project, your project needs, and the optimization stuff that you have to worry about. But this is another type of workflow that you can actually try and use. So for the pros, we have a highly reusable. It's great across all assets. It's non-destructive and easy to iterate. You can make more and more different variations very, very quickly. It reduces the unique amount of textures, aka texture samples, which is something that can actually run up on your memory budget for your VRAM. It scales very well with large environments because you can actually use tilables and you can make sure that your textile density is actually accurate and can be maintained throughout the entirety of your production. You have centralized control, essentially, like because they're just general single material layer assets, you can very easily manage and audit them if something becomes unoptimized or inaccurate based off of your PVR standards. And they're very great for blending, things like for dirt, wear, damage, and any other type of variation. Now, the cons. Of course, there's a higher shader complexity and instruction cost, so that is going to be one of the caveats on optimization. You have to essentially have more and more logic layered upon a single asset. There's more setup up front. Essentially, you have to do a lot of your homework first before you do this. So if you're already in the middle of a production, you can't really use the kind of real strengths of this type of workflow. We got as much as we could out of Concord when we worked on it, but it was already a few years into the production. So some things got this, but not everything could. It's harder to art direct very specifically because the assets are all using pre-made tilables. So if you start to kind of composite these together, it's very hard to try and apply art direction because you can't just say, hey, go back into Substance Painter and fix this one particular area of the textures. That's not the case. You'd have to either go into like the mask itself or just see how they're compositing or how they're working within the logic to try and find what the issue could be. Debugging can be messy and expensive, especially if you have complex graphs. But I would say an asterisk on that one is as long as the material and shaders team actually provides nice, clean, and organized graphs, that may not actually be too much of a problem. It's just applying due diligence ahead of time. Can become over-engineered and if not controlled. Any sort of thing that we work on that applies a lot of technical kind of overhead like this can be very easily over-engineered. You can apply so much logic and so many features and so many toggles and so many switches that a general artist, like an environment artist or prop artist on the team that's trying to work on a fire hydrant can't actually manage that very well because there's so many things. And that's kind of where, as an artist, as you work on this, you have to know, hey, from a UI sense, I need to make sure that any general like artist that has no technical background for this kind of stuff knows what this is. Or say 6 months down the line, you haven't touched any of these things, you're on a different part of the project. You need to know what you had left to work on this to know where everything is. So if you can leave nice, clean, organized graphs, that's really what you would want to have. But that is the pros and cons for the material layering workflow. For legacy, we have, of course, pros. Full artistic control per assets. Again, that's a given. Easier to achieve highly unique hero assets. Again, because we have full control in the DCC. You have predictable performance because you have very simplified shaders. Faster one-off assets. Clear artist-friendly workflows. Again, we've been working on this kind of stuff for many, many years in the game, so there's not much of a technical overhead for this. But again, we have cons. Performance costs, unique textures per asset, less reusability across all. Iteration requires rebaking and retexturing, which can take time depending on how large or how complex the asset is. Harder to maintain consistency across large scenes, and scaling to larger projects becomes expensive because you have to make everything unique every single time unless it's, say, like a modular asset set. So there is a lot of pros and cons on both sides. So you have to kind of weigh in on what kind of production that you're on and what can you gain out of this. You can use some legacy assets and have some layered materials like most other of these studios do. But note that, again, it's just going to depend on what you want to get out of this. But I think with that, let's hop into Unreal Engine so I can kind of break down what it would take to make this material layering workflow. So here I have a small scene. I actually have a couple different things I've set up for optimization purposes, just because material layering, again, as a whole, can be, again, very complex because you have to manage so many different kinds of assets. Like, as an example, I have these two wooden assets. One is a full material, as in it has all textures necessary to kind of see. So here we have inside of Unreal Engine, I have this layer asset, which will go over all the necessary assets that you need for this type of workflow. But as you can see, I have albedo, ambient occlusion, metallic if I need it, normal map, and roughness, 5 textures. 5 textures at 1024, that can add up a lot. So we can try and optimize. So channel packing, typically, the most time we always see is an ORM type of channel pack. So ambient occlusion gets tossed into the red channel, roughness goes into the green channel, and metallic in the blue channel. Even sometimes the height map goes in the alpha channel or something like that. But I've actually taken it a step further than most folks would actually be comfortable with. So if we go into here, so this other material, I have 2 textures because, hey, 2 is definitely better than 3, and 3 is definitely better than 4 and 5. So I actually have 2 different types of channel packs in this case. One channel pack is a normal height channel pack. So I have the X and Y, the red and green channels of the normal map, and then I generate the blue channel part of it in the shader. Then I handle the height map inside of the blue channel for this. So I can use this if I need things for like parallax occlusion or even displacement. And then for my other channel pack, I have my roughness and metallic, but then I have a texture called a gradient map. Now, a gradient map essentially is just taking your albedo and making it grayscale. But I've actually taken it a step further in that I created essentially histogram range. Like if any of you are familiar with the node inside of Substance Designer, what this does is it allows you to control the range of black to white value and essentially help you remap the full range with a standard color, essentially. These colors come together and you now have a tintable material with various tints of lighter and darker tones on your albedo. But by thinking about all of these little bits of optimization, we can actually try to make sure that even if we're using material layering, we can still be very, very optimized in that. So you can just choose kind of what you want to approach with it. You don't have to use my approach, but you can also, use some basic channel packing. But let's actually kind of go from there and hop into what it takes to make something like this. Everything you see here, except for actually this asset, is using material layering. So everything here is actually a part of a material layered asset and use the same material layer components. So the components that you might find are, if we go in here, go to my materials, is you have a material layer asset. That essentially is the kind of material component. So you can actually set up a master material, essentially a kind of archetype of material. Like I have material layers for packed assets, for cloth, for displacement, for just a general base asset that's just scalable, like, or just scalar values. But when you set up one of these guys, you can actually create an instance of that master material, and thus you can actually start to create your own materials. So in this case, I have this Philippine mahogany because this is actually part of a mid-century modern scene that I've been working on. And you have this. You can actually apply different types of parameters as much as you want. Like I have for this guy, albedo tinting, normal map intensity, roughness adjustments. I can even adjust UV tiling if I want to. I even have a little bit of a debug toggle. So for some of us in materials, we actually always have little toggles to check on, like, hey, how does our normal map look? Like, how's the geometry of the surface look? Or a spec check. So in this case, like this spec check, what it'll do is it'll just make the albedo black, so you can actually visualize the roughness a lot better. So you can actually see how your roughness is rendering on the surface. So having little kind of material switch toggle parameters are really great because you can always debug what you need to have. So besides the material layer assets and the material layer instance assets, like actually let me pull up some more. So we have Philippine mahogany. I have a worn Philippine mahogany. So like if I want to actually apply wear and tear, I can use that. I also even have a finger block material. So it's a little weird named, but what finger block materials are is essentially it's the same type of Philippine mahogany, but it's using a parquet that is in a 4 to 5 kind of finger shape in one of these diagonal checkerboards, essentially. So I have a couple of these different assets for different things. You're probably also seeing this as black, like just like the other one. This is not a spec check, actually. This is actually a part of another optimization that I've set up for these materials because, again, depending on how early you can set this up, you can start to find ways to optimize it as best as you can. So we'll go more into it in a bit, but you have your material layer assets, and then you need to have your material layer blend assets. So what a material layer blend asset is, when you open one of these guys up, like this Vertex paint one, is it's a simple lerp. So you have your layers, a bottom layer and a top layer, and it's going to blend with a black and white value. Now, again, breaking it down simply, the material layer blend asset just requires you to have a black and white mask. You can use whatever you want to generate that. It could be a bitmap, like a mask texture. You can actually have vertex paint, which paints white and black in the area. You can have other things, like I've actually set it up for distance fields as well, so that when assets actually interact with each other, they can create a mask. You can do a lot of things on here. So a lot of this comes down to however you want to make it so that it actually renders pretty efficiently, like with your blending assets. You can even also, in some ways, like I have right here, I have a Vertex Paint material layer blend asset, but this is actually specific because you can actually pull out specific textures to actually be a part of the blend. So we have a lot of these assets you might have seen before. For those of you who are not familiar, the term material attribute is a part of Unreal Engine's kind of material layering kind of architecture, where instead of you blending textures like you typically would in a material, you'll be blending whole materials together. So what you do is, and if we go into, say, this material layer asset, let me just double click it. You set up your material like you normally would, but everything goes into this make material attribute node. What it does is it takes all these individual texture inputs into a single input. That's a material attribute input. And that will allow you to now take this and blend the material as a whole versus, again, those textures by themselves. So you can actually have it so that, once you set these up, you can actually pull out specific things. Like I can pull out from a material attribute just the roughness. So I can blend just the roughness together, make a new roughness, and then put it right back into my material attributes by using these get and set nodes. Get will grab the information, set will set up new information from whatever you tend to set up with. So this guy is actually just going to be for roughness adjustments. So like if I want to have like wipes or thumbprints or whatever I want on my surface, I can use a tileable texture with just vertex paint on this. But yes, besides that, let's go into how you would actually approach creating something like this. So let me just save all these and let's go back into here. So you'll set up your material layer assets just kind of like how you would with a master material. So let's go into here. So start to think about kind of the archetypes of your materials. So what I mean by archetype is you don't want to have, and this is kind of the rule of thumb for master materials is, you don't want to have one material to control every single material. That'd be a big problem because God forbid if someone makes a change to that master material, you'll then have shaders compiling across all 1,000, 2,000, however many shaders you have across the project. Not fun to have. So we typically have master materials for different disciplines. So you would have one for environment assets, or you'd have some for props, for characters, for VFX, for post-process. Whatever the discipline it is, it will typically have something like for a master material for that. Then you can even go further and have it so that like, hey, certain master materials like a displacement one, we'd have one specifically because displacement is kind of a workflow in Unreal that's kind of very specific to certain types of meshes, especially meshes that are nanite based. So you'd probably want to have their own different types of materials. And then we'd have other ones for different shading models. So if you want, subsurface scattering, if you want emissive materials, if you want cloth, you would probably want to set up each one of these materials so that they all have something like that. But for the most part, I'm mostly using these material base, baseful types of assets. And every time I make an instance, I'm just making sure that I'm setting up the different material. If I have a metal, if I have a wood, rust, whatever the tileable material it is, I'll set all these guys up. I'll make sure that they have predefined parameters because when you set up one of these guys, like parameter wise, this is just the default for the material. What's cool is when you actually go into the material stack of your material layering project, you actually have kind of your own instance of all the parameters, basically. So if I set this to 1 here, 1.5 here, I can go into any sort of material layer stack and actually edit that stuff after the fact, and it won't change the default for this. So that's one of the things that's also really cool about this. It's non-destructive. But once we go into here, we set up all these assets, all these kind of material layers and material blend assets. Then how do we take this and actually make a material? Well, what we can do is we actually have to make another master material in this case. So you actually have to have master materials, just like how you would, because not everything's going to be able to have a material layer to it. But you can actually go into here and say, hey, I have environment layer or prop layer or tileable layer. So these all are material layer master materials. All it requires is you have to turn your project from a standard environment. So here, let me unclick this. When you open up any sort of environment material inside of Unreal Engine, you'll have the material output node. When you start to use material attributes, you have to go into the details here to turn it to use material attributes. And that way it can actually go in here and actually use the single input of material attributes. But you just need this. There is a node called material attributes layers, and that knows to activate the material layer stack UI. Plug this in, you get your material attributes, you get your set material attributes, and then you plug it into the output. That's it. Anything else you want to do after the fact, that's kind of on you. It's like I'm doing this for subsurface color, so I can apply general subsurface color from the base color if I need to, but you don't have to. So from there, you take this and you make a instance of it. And you can make an instance in a couple different ways. Like the example I have here is I have this sofa that is actually using the material layering workflow. I'll make an instance of that prop and say, this is for my sofa, or this is for my chair or something. So you'll go in here, and as you can see, when you open up an instance, it looks just like any other instance. But there's this layer parameters UI, and you'll have something that looks like this. So your background layer is your first layer. So if we click on here, you'll see that if I turn off all the layers, I have this kind of black looking material. And it's going to look weird because the black looking material is actually using my wood material, but there's again certain parameters that are toggled on outside of this. But I have this material ready. Then I can go into my next layer, which every subsequent layer after the fact will now have to have a blend asset. So layer assets, again, depending on what type of instance you plug in, you'll be able to have all the parameters to change, like if I want to change the tint color of the fabric, if I want to change the null map, if I want to add wear and tear, if I want to turn off wear and tear. Like if I go into here, say, hey, do I want wear? Nope, then I'll turn it off. Hey, do I want smudges? Nope, turn it off. If I want dirt, nope, turn it off. So what's cool is you can turn on and off stuff, and this actually will affect performance because having these static switches to toggle on or off certain features will actually cut out those necessary instructions or necessary mathematical values. It takes them completely out of effect and just uses what's available essentially, thus cheapening the material on a performance sense. So having toggles is really, really good. Because again, it's all controlled through the instance inside of this layer stack. If I go into another asset, like another chair, I can toggle it on or off if I want to, separate from this one. And so it all applies different logic on top of things. Then again, your blend layer assets, you can use different things. So in this case, I have a material ID type of material blend. And this is not your typical material ID. I actually have a system I came up with a custom node that allows me to actually generate using like an ID mask. So I have this ID mask that uses your standard primary colors and plus like black and white. And this will allow me to actually have 16 channels to choose from. So if I have a really dense asset that has 16 layers for materials, I can do so with this. So you can use material layer blends for masking out individual materials, like one's fabric, one's wood, one's metal, one's leather or something. You can choose all these different types of things. Then you can then layer using other methods of other things like vertex paint on top of this. So after that, we go in through here and we apply like our necessary secondary, like other materials, like another type of wood, like maybe there's sometimes 2 different kinds of wood on top. So you can control that as well. And again, having its own different parameters versus the background one. But then we have our other types of assets, because this is typically for most props. You can even use this for modular assets too, but there are other types, and this is actually something that I've talked about for kind of how Naughty Dog works on theirs for things. So what happens is that you do your layering through a surface. It's not bespoke to a certain thing like the sofa. It's just a generic surface. And you can then use this generic surface with the different parameter stuff on different things. So like if I go into this material that I have right here, if I go into the layers, I have about 5 different layers here. So let's turn off all these guys. So my background layer is this varnish wood. Then I'll have this roughness smudge, which the roughness smudge applies a roughness on top that I can control using some vertex paint. So this guy's actually using some vertex paint. It's mostly for the alpha channel for the vertex paint. So like if I want to, I can go in here, go to mesh paint. I can select this guy, go into paint, and then just choose, let's see, I'll turn off the alpha channel, and I'll toggle off all the other ones besides alpha, and that will allow me to paint away all these kind of little swipes and smudges and stuff. So you can be very minute in how you control this, but again, this is for one of the active layers that I currently have. So that's just for the alpha. Then, of course, we have our wear, which wear is also controlled by vertex paint. In this case, it's a special kind of vertex paint layer because I've actually set it up so that the vertex paint doesn't just paint the paint, essentially. I have it so that it's going to append the vertex paint, choose the channel, and then I'm using a height lerp node, which this is a node that allows you to have not just the color of the vertex paint, but with a black and white image, typically a height map, to kind of inject more information on top of it. In this case, I actually generated this map called a misc map. And I've done previous videos about material layering. So what a misc map is it's a channel pack of your wear, your tears, your damage, your smudges, your dirt, all that stuff. That gets put into a channel pack mask so you can actually use it. And this is for the tileable material. You can actually use these misc maps for props as well. You can generate something like this inside of Substance Painter, but you can actually use this to our advantage to inject specific shapes of where we want this to be applied more for the surface itself. Then what we do is I lower the color down a little bit because what I then want to do is I want to use this node called a blend overlay, which acts like the overlay blending layer for Photoshop, and apply a grunge texture on top. So how overlay typically works is it doesn't like full black and full white. It likes more of the non-white and black colors, like all the grays in between. So I lower the value down just a little bit just to make it a tiny bit darker, but then that allows me to have true full control of this overlaid grunge on top. Then I can control with the contrast. And then if I want to make things more opaque or less opaque of the overall vertex blend, I can control all of that as it goes through this layer. So what happens is if I go into here now, turn on my red color, I can say, hey, let's start to blend this kind of wear and tear. So as I start to blend the wear and tear, you'll start to see that the shape isn't just like a circle, but it's actually using like actual, almost like wood fibers as I'm blending it. And if I'm using like the actual like varnish planer, I can actually go in here and control these changes through here. So like if I want it to be more contrasted, I can. Like if I change the vertex paint contrast to 1, I can make him really, really sharp if I want to. If I want to adjust the tiling of the grunge itself, I can raise it or lower it, thus having a different shape for how the wear and tear is happening. And again, if I don't want this wear to be like so strong, I can lower down the opacity. So it's like kind of faded a little bit. So it's not like perfectly one-to-one. So I have all this control over the vertex paint stuff after the fact, which is really nice. I can even change what type of grunge I'm using and also what type of misc map I'll be using. So we have a lot of control to kind of go over with this. But it's really useful to have this because I can take this now and I can actually apply it to different assets like this one or this one or this one or this one. These are all assets that have bespoke UVs, but they also have tileable UVs as well. I can use a single one of these material layer assets to tile all these assets that are made of wood and use vertex paint to make it feel unique. Vertex paint is probably one of the most cheapest ways to help with masking because it's saved on the vertices themselves. The only issue is, of course, you have to have a little bit more geometry. But as we've talked about in the presentation, it's okay to have a little bit more geometry. As long as you don't go too crazy with it and you use your geometry effectively, as in like making sure that the asset has good silhouette, you can use a little bit more geometry to have some more vertices to kind of work with. So I can go into any one of these assets and I can paint them. So I can actually have some more like control over the paint, like have more wear and tear, or if I want to like undo the wear and tear, I can. I can even go into here and start to apply my varnish. So varnish, or so not necessarily it's varnish, but it's varnish grime. So what varnish grime is, it's a type of, oh, sorry, forgot to toggle it. So varnish grime is this. So varnish is it's can be water-based or oil-based, but it's a sticky type of kind of adherence to the top of the wood as a coating. And over time, it starts to get darker because it's accumulating, you know, dead skin, oil, dirt, water, liquid, what have you. But it allows you to kind of have this kind of darkening on the surface. So you can actually control a lot of this. So in this case, if I go back into my little layer right here, go to the varnish grime, go to the blend assets, go to the, let's see, scalar, and okay, get the opacity here, perfect. So let's go into this guy and just keep painting it. And if we want to, let's take a look at what we're having here. So it looks like the vertex color is not showing. Interesting. I wonder why it's not showing up. Because usually you're supposed to be able to see it, but for whatever reason right now, I'm not getting both as I want to, because I actually have the red and the green. So actually let's do, I think it's the blue channel. I didn't put anything for the green channel. Let's see, let's start to paint this. No. That's totally fine. But as you can see here, I can make this feel super, super unique with the vertex paint and have every single one of these guys work well with how they're supposed to be. But again, vertex paint's one of them. IDs are another one of them. There's another that I've also set up inside of one of these materials, and that is something called distance fields. So some of you might have heard what distance fields are. What distance fields are essentially is they're essentially a kind of rudimentary version of, in this case, for geometry, it's a rudimentary version of a mesh that you can actually kind of use as approximation for generating the kind of inverse and outverse, essentially have a signed version of what the mesh is. And you can actually have it so that these meshes can actually interact with each other and actually have a material component that interacts with it. What I mean is, say if I have like this, you know, plane right here, and I have this cube right here. If I turn on this, I can actually have it so that the interaction creates a mask. And I can actually, you know, go in here and turn off mesh paint mode. I can move him, and as I move him, the mask updates with it. So the interaction of the two is actually created by this node right in here. So the node is called distance to nearest surface. It's using world position, and I'm using a simple divide to kind of control the gradient of how far away from the interaction is versus how close it is. It's actually inverted typically, so it's not creating a white mask, it's actually creating a black mask between the two. So I have to invert it using a 1- node. And then using a similar method that we did with vertex paint, where I'm using a blend overlay and a texture and a contrast, it allows me to have full control over all this. So like if I go in here, say like I don't like how far the mask is growing, I can go into here, go into this, and change my distance field like sensitivity for the strength. And I can lower down the contrast so that it's not as strong. And I can even lower the tiling of the wood texture that I'm using for the grunge. But the one thing you need to note is, depending on how your distance fields are for other assets, they also can be affected too. So either you can actually turn this stuff off for every single instance. Like if you go into one of these guys and say, hey, type in distance, you can actually go in here and say affect distance field lighting. You turn that off and it will turn it to make sure that it doesn't work. If you're using it for surfaces like planes like this, you typically want to make sure that you turn this off so that you can actually make sure that the plane itself is not being affected versus this. So the plane I have here doesn't have it, but if it did, it would actually be creating like a much larger distance field, which I don't want. And now the last thing that I want to go over, because some of you might have been wondering, how is it that I have for, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 assets. How do they have different albedo colors? And why do they all look kind of different in some ways, like versus like how it should work for like one of these materials? And that is actually something that I've talked about in a couple of my other videos before on my YouTube, but it's actually using another method that was actually talked about a lot in Concord. It's called custom primitive data. And what custom primitive data is it's rudimentary kind of simple binary data that can be saved on the instance of a mesh and not on the material itself. So each and every one of these different mesh instances have the same material, but each one of them, besides like having vertex paint, which is saved on the instance, can have this rudimentary data saved as well. So how does it work exactly? So when you go into one of these material layer assets like this, like say if I go into this varnish one, if I go to the Philippine wood, actually let's go this way, this guy right here. So you'll see like he looks black even though he's supposed to have a color to him. Like you'll see him here, they all have this brown color. But where's this kind of controllable parameter here? Well, that's the thing. If you're using custom primitive data, you cannot actually see it here in the parameters because you're going to actually have the control here. If I go into this and type in custom, you'll see I have this custom primitive data result. And I have 7 different values, but they're basically different parameters I can control. Some of them are single scalar values, like this one, which is UV rotation. I have this one, which is for albedo tint, which is why each and every one of these guys have different colors. And then I have select range, which is the parameter that controls the range of gradient for how much I want more darker or brighter colors. And then the last one is a UV set toggle. Like if I want to use a different UV set for different whatever reasons. So how it works is, let's go into the actual material layer master material that I've made. And depending on the parameter that you want to keep, like say this one, you have to go in, typically you'd have like, hey, here's my color that I'm going to use for albedo tinting. Usually you right click and you convert it to a parameter. But in this parameter, that's where you would see it in the parameter view for your instances. But to make it a custom primitive data, you have to go down here and actually toggle it on. Now, you're not done yet because there's another thing that has to be changed, and that is the data index. So what this data index is every single one of these parameters does have a limit. You can only have 64 indexes of value on a typical mesh instance. So starting at 0 to 63, you have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. They're essentially scalar channels. So like if we go back to here, I have 0 right here, and that's for a single scalar value for UV rotation. Albedo tint, I have 4 of them for the red, green, blue, alpha. So that's 4. Then I have select range. That's for my 6th one. My 7th one, even though it's, again, set at 6, is my UV toggle. So I'll only have like a few more left. But you have to make sure that every time you make a new custom primitive data, that you do not overlap the same values. Because if you give them the same values, then it's going to use the same custom primitive data as like a single thing. Like you can have 2 different parameters, but then them have the same data as the source. Like if you have a wood color albedo tint and you have a dirt albedo tint or something, they could be the same exact parameter, or they could be different parameter names, but they can use the same index data so that they can actually use both values. And you don't want that because sometimes you want them to be different. So that's something that you can actually control with all this. So that's why each and every one of these guys looks very different. Like if I go in here to this guy, I can go into the range and say, I'll set it to 2. Higher ranges have less gradation, so it's going to look a lot brighter because there's not as much dark colors. If I set this to 0.1, you'll have a very, very dark value because you're going to use more of the darker range of the stuff. If you set it to 1, that gives us the default range of everything. I can then go in here and change my albedo tint to like super red, like that. And again, it's not affecting any one of these guys. I can even go in here. I can actually rotate the UVs. So how a UV rotation node using a custom rotator node works is 0 to 1 is 0 to 360. So if I want to rotate like 90 degrees, I would use a fourth of the value, which is 0.25. And that will rotate all of my UVs that are in this layer that use this. But I'll leave it at 0. And then, of course, we have our UV toggle set, which is actually better for this guy. So you can see right here, I have this really nice like Philippine wood. It actually has like the nice like proper textile density. Here's the problem though. What if I didn't have, I have 2 different UV sets for this, but what if I have like 0, the first one? It's gonna look like this, and that's like the wrong textile density, and you don't want that. So if I have 2 different UV sets for different things, like if I have this for a baked asset, so the first UV set would be for baking down things uniquely. And then if I want the toggleable one, I'll just change the toggle set to be right here. So this is kind of how you can take your projects to another level using material layering. It's, again, very useful. It's very modular. I could take this same asset that I've made here, and I can even apply it to some other assets. Like I have a couple bits of like modular walls that I've been working on. So I can grab like one of these modular walls and just give it a little bit of work. I just need to make sure that this guy has enough geometry to use. So if I go in here, grab this guy, and then just apply the same material. So if I go here, so I select this guy, and as you can see, it looks a little off, but it's because it's using a lot of stuff off the top. So first off, let's turn off the distance field part. Then let's go into here, and we need to turn off the mesh painting stuff. Because like right now, he's probably like a really odd color or something. So let's fill this with black. If it's also looking weird, it might be because this asset might actually be a... No, nanite is not on, so that's perfect. So there we go. So now this shows me like what the surface looks like, even though it looks like the alpha channel is still on there. So let's fill it. There we go. So now we can go in here and make our changes. So this guy has the material, it has the custom primitive data, but we now have to toggle the custom primitive data. So first, how it works is when you first set it up, you'll have all the parameters here you'll see. You just need to toggle them on. So first parameter, let's see, albedo tinting, UV set toggle. Oh, undeclared, I don't want that one. Here, let's go into this guy first. Oh, it looks like something got undone. Let me fix that. It might have been in that last little update that we just did with the material. Let me fix that. Where is it? It's probably in here, yes. Go into this guy. And I just need to delete him. Okay, and now let's go back over here. So now we have them all toggling proper. So in this case, let's first rotate him because typically if this is supposed to be some really long wall, wood grain does not flow to the shortest edge like this. It usually flows to the longest edge. So what we can do here is let's rotate it to 90 degrees. We can do the same thing here. So 0.25. So now it's doing that. Now We go in here. And let's toggle the albedo color. Let's select the range and select the toggle. Do the same thing here, select the range and select the toggle. So now we can actually use this guy effectively for whatever we want. So like if we want to go into here, now we can go into our mesh paint and we can toggle some wear. So looks like for this guy, he's only got, just the 2 vertices basically, so I can't really do much else on there. But looks like the other worn asset needs to have the same custom primitive data because it's rotating the opposite way. So that's like another thing we're going to probably have to fix. But again, it allows me to have so much versatility for any single one of these types of assets. And the less you have to make, the more cheaper performance is going to end up being. Now, some people might have questions like, so how does it all work in the end for performance? So typically, the big performance hitters are going to be if you're using more unique textures. Every single texture from one of these material layer instances is going to come at a cost of sorts. So you want to make sure that you use less amounts of texture samples. So like in the case of me using that special channel pack of 2 textures, that allows me to actually use a lot less textures than I would if I had 3, 4, or 5. So the less amount of textures will allow us so that we don't have to have it called upon every single time for each material. If you are reusing material layer instances, essentially, instead of having a different material layer every single time, the instances will help pull in the cost of the draw call. The other thing is that this all counts technically as one full draw call, because what's going to happen is when the material is saved and compiled, it's going to come down to just what is the pixel. So if you have just like all of this stuff turned off, it's only going to count like the 1 layer because there's only 1 pixel of information, which is this. But if I start to add in here, I'll have another pixel, another pixel, another pixel, another pixel. So wherever I vertex paint stuff, I'm going to have different pixels and have different materials. So depending on how you're masking things and what is fully masked is where you're going to actually end up seeing all of this kind of information on here. So instructions can also be expensive because if you use so much logic, it can be very, very expensive. And so the problem is that, you need to have your toggles. So like I talked about before, where you had those toggles that turn on wear and tear or something like that. Have these toggles to turn off logic if you don't use it. If you have the toggle like constantly on, you're going to run into a bunch of issues. So you don't want to have like, wear and tear if you're not using it. So just take that out. But also just make sure that you're trying to reuse as much as you can. Like I have this one material right here and it's for a bunch of other stuff. But yeah, that's definitely something that I would say is just make sure that you are just reusing whatever you can, just because that's the name of the game, especially for modularity's sake. Like we always want to try and reuse more stuff that we can. But yeah, I think with that is material layering. I think, Jeremy, if you want to, we can hop on questions. I haven't seen any questions as of yet, but we can definitely go through it.
Yeah, I've been grabbing them as we've gone. They're pretty minimal, just because like this is a very like hardcore, like it's almost brain melting. It's pretty cool though. I think it's the stuff you're covering is great. Do you want to? So there's not too many questions, but I mean that's okay. It's already over the hour. So do we want to share our cameras and we can kind of go through the
Sure,
handful
yeah.
of questions we got? Let's see if we can.
Yeah, here, let me.
There we go. And then I'll turn. I'm like, how do I? There we go. Nice. There we are. Hello. Okay.
Yes. Hello.
Okay. So, yes, probably the highest rated question was, with this workflow, would every asset need second UV channels? And if so, what's the performance and memory cost of adding extra UV channels? And are there cases where maybe you'd want to avoid doing so?
So it comes down to you don't necessarily have to have multiple UV sets. It's mostly going to depend on if you have baked assets mixed with tileable assets. Like if you have like a baked normal map in AO, which, what I talked about earlier, which is the fact that geometry is so much cheaper now. We wouldn't need necessarily a normal map because the geometry is already there. Um, so you don't have to have a secondary UV set, though it's not as expensive as most people tend to think for it. It's going to depend on how much geometry you already have on the asset. But like in my experience working with Naughty Dog, they had 4 for different things for shaders. So it's like it can be, but it just depends on the complexity of the asset itself.
Yeah, some of the projects I've been on, the average asset had 2 UV sets, and then in some cases 3 or 4, depending on like very specific circumstances. So I don't know if there's a memory. Do you know of a memory footprint that gets affected with
there's a
UVs?
small memory footprint. So it's like essentially it's the UVs are saved to the vertices, and it's like it's not too much. It's almost like the same amount of data that's like vertex color would tend to have, but it's per UV set itself. So it's really dependent on how many vertices you have. So but I mean, in the end, also what's funny is we already kind of have the cost of 2 UV sets because by default, Unreal Engine imports you with a light map UV. So you
Right.
already are taking in the cost without realizing it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I jumped straight into the questions, but the talk was there was so much information in there. It's really good. I look forward to putting it on our YouTube channel, and I'll make sure to link it to your channel as well. One of the other questions, so this one's coming from me, is like you listed virtual textures as like a more advanced topic. What are the benefits of them? Because a lot of people just say to just turn it on, just have virtual textures on.
So virtual textures, there's 2 different types, but one of the big ones is like standard virtual textures have a kind of MIP map that's different where in most cases when you have an asset, like say you have a chair, and as you go further and further away, the whole texture itself, like depending on distance, starts to lower the cost. If you have a large asset, like say a big boulder or something, it's a lot harder because it's going to constantly be in frame, like depending on what it is. But what virtual texture does is it actually quadrants out certain areas that you're going to see. So if you don't see the backside of a boulder, that's going to MIP out completely. And the front side will have like the full MIP. And then if you're only looking at the bottom and not the top, then you'll actually MIP more of the bottom, or sorry, MIP more of the top and not the bottom. So you'll have close-up MIPs that are really nice. And then the further and further away, it gets lower and lower essentially.
Wow. Okay. Dude, that's pretty wild actually.
Yeah, it also
yeah.
kind of helps with packing in a way where like what it also does is it packs down like if you have similar UVs for certain texture, like say if you have 2 different texture sets, like one's for UV set 1, one's for UV set 2, it actually will help kind of pack them a little bit together inside there, so it's actually going to be like a little bit better. It's like for data wise when it starts to compile it down.
Right. Is this layered material approach, I guess, is it achievable on like all of the consoles like Switch 2 and Xbox? And I mean, the games you listed earlier kind of prove that, but I guess Switch 2 wasn't mentioned, right?
Well, I would say it's like Switch 2 is at the point of like it's now PS4 quality, I would say. So I would think that you can do it. It just depends on the type of game itself.
Right.
I mean,
so you have to
if somehow
optimize
they're
for
able
it
to,
or benefit for it.
I mean, they're able to get Cyberpunk on Switch 2, so I'm like, anything's possible at this point.
True. It's a good point. Let me see what
See,
UV.
what's gonna be crazy if they can get GTA 6 on there. If they get GTA 6 on there,
I need to see what that game looks like when
in
it comes out. I'm super curious how they approached all of their
we're gonna
asset
see
creation.
a global amount of work just not done on November 19th when that game comes out, because I
a lot
heard
of people
the
calling out
numbers.
sick.
That game is gonna. They're saying on the low end in the first week it's gonna sell 37 million copies, which I'm
It's
like,
crazy.
and just on Xbox and PlayStation alone, like that thing's gonna make its $1 billion budget back within a week, which is just crazy to think.
I mean, I guess they earned it with all of the stuff they've been doing previously.
True.
Let's see. The UV rotation parameter that was exposed, does it affect the vertex paint blend layer?
No, because it's only going to affect the asset itself, because the vertex paint's based on the geometry, not on the material. So like the texture itself is being plugged in, so like all the textures are connected to a UV node. It's not like it's going to move the physical geometry UVs of it. It's just the texture itself, because you can have different texture nodes for different things. Like if you want like your normal map and your ambient occlusion map to be tiled differently than your albedo, you can do that.
Right.
So just based on whatever textures are plugged in, geometry itself will not be affected.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. The next question is, when authoring your packed RGB masks, do you typically set up the tilables in Painter to see how they interact, or do you just create the black and white masks and go back and forth between Painter and the engine to adjust?
So yeah, depending on the asset, I will bring kind of the SBSAR that I make for the tilables into Painter just to kind of see how it's looking, because I also typically set it up in a way so that when you open it up in Painter, that it knows the proper textile density based off the physical size. Like I'm very
Oh, interesting.
I'm very meticulous on like, I'm very crazy on physical size. So like the metadata that you see in Substance Designer, that's like, what is the X, Y, and Z? I will put in like the whatever measurements that I want it to be, so that it
Yeah.
knows it's like the proper actual size. Because then in Painter, what you do is you can actually turn it to physical size for tiling,
Right.
and it knows to use that instead of just using textile density.
Yeah. So if you match the physical size in Designer, you can have it
It's also
exactly in Painter.
Yeah, because it's also like the project that I've been working on is based off of real furniture. So I'm just using the real dimensions that I find like on
Right.
West Elm or somewhere else. So I'm using the real physical size on there. But yeah, typically what I'll do is I'll just go in, I'll check it out if it works good, and I'll just, I typically just do it all in masking anyways. Like I'll have like a kind of rudimentary version of it. Like even in my old ArtStation project for the Colt that was material layering,
Yeah.
it looked really bad, but then when you get into Unreal Engine, you start to fine tune the shaders, it looks so much better.
Right. Yeah, it's dude, this stuff's fascinating. Let's see what other questions are. The other two are actually from me. so
I'm glad. Hey, I got to
dude,
say though, like Jeremy, I've always been a big fan of your stuff, because I did Twitch streaming like a long time ago,
yeah,
and like just seeing that you made a business out of it, like is
it's just
just
kind of running.
insane.
It's just kind of
Because
running.
it's like, I mean, like how many people in in development, like especially for Twitch streaming, like really get that many people viewing at a time? Like not much.
Dude, I mean, for the first 2 years, there was like 10 people watching or something like that. And I mean, I quit looking at the numbers. If there's 0 people watching one day, I'm not even gonna know. So
Yeah, it's true. I mean, as long as I had
yeah,
someone to chat with, like one question or whatever, I'm like, that's all
dude,
that
that's
matters
what
for me,
it's.
honestly.
It holds me accountable to like push myself, but then also answering questions for like demystifying things and whatnot. So on my end, I do a lot of open world games, right? And because of that, we usually avoid vertex color, just because of like lotting and stuff. So we usually will lean on mask textures, and of course, like in the recent updates of Unreal, there's like mesh. I think it's called mesh painting, which is
Yeah.
kind of similar to that, but it has its quirks. What are your thoughts on like the mask textures versus like vertex color? Like which ones is one better than the other, or is there a very specific use case for when you would pick one over
I
the other?
mean, I would definitely say is if you're working on something like, especially like if you're doing vistas, like vistas, because they're so far off, you can't really use vertex paint for something like that. So that's good for using masks for that. I mean, also texture, it's again, it's a give and take, because textures can also get mipped out pretty bad too.
Yeah,
Like I remember like if you have like the wrong MIP settings, like you're gonna have an issue like, oh, like why is like my opacity texture like why is my texture completely disappearing, or why is like my glass become completely opaque, and it's because it's mipping out in a certain way. So I think it's a case for case basis of like, again, what are your sight lines, especially for like an open world game. It depends on how far and how large it is. Like I remember I was talking to a studio because they're talking about substrate, because they're like trying to learn how to use that, and they're like, our biggest sight line is like 4 kilometers from the center of town, like where they're at, to like the coastline. I'm like, oh god, 4 kilometers for like a straight shot, like, and they want to do it with substrate. I'm like, I can only imagine like the technical hurdles they have to try and get to that. But yeah, it's just going to depend on the type of asset. Like
yeah,
if you have close-up props, vertex paint would be perfectly fine. But like if you have, say, I don't know, like vistas, texture masking is perfectly fine too. Mesh painting's a little weird, but again, that's also because it's nanite and it's like also vertex. It's a vertex texture too, technically.
Yeah.
I just don't like it because it looks too pixelated just because of how it's being generated and stuff.
Yeah, I guess it's being heavily compressed. I think that's what's causing the pixelation, but I could be wrong. I noticed that like you were showing that you were packing your normal map channels and then a height map. What are you using that height map for usually? Because a lot of the times you're going to need like a higher bit rate on height maps, right? But I guess maybe that's only terrain. But yeah.
So I mostly use it for like parallax occlusion, just because like honestly speaking, like you have a pretty good silhouette without needing tessellation. So that's pretty good, but like sometimes the surfaces still look kind of flat.
Yeah.
So having parallax occlusion is like a kind of a, having more geometry and parallax occlusion kind of takes up the need for not having tessellation. I actually get around the issue because there is a type of bit compression, BC7. It's the uncompressed one, basically.
Yeah.
But if it's one single texture and it's like a 512 or even 1024 texture, you can kind of get away with it being a BC7 versus like a BC3, which is the one that you typically would get if you just leave it as a linear color default thing. So like when I was testing this stuff out, I'm like, okay, yeah, the normal map's looking pretty bad just because the way the normal maps hit, like the light's hitting and stuff. And so when I just did BC7, it works. So the fact that I'm down to 2 textures and I still get a pretty good looking material with it. I mean, one of them, let's see, the GRM, the gradient one, that's using BC3 because it's just default, and then BC7 for the normal map one. So just 2 textures. I think that's pretty doable. I think like
performance-wise. No, I mean it's cool to see because I've seen other people use that extra channel in the normal map to just put something else in there because it gets changed anyways when Unreal gets a hold of it and compresses it.
Yeah, I mean that's also one of the reasons why I got rid of ambient occlusion, because like Lumen typically will generate ambient occlusion for you, especially if you have decent geometry. So I was like, well, there probably isn't a need for me to use the material ambient occlusion anyway, especially because there's certain settings that also are toggled off, so you don't really see it necessarily as you would expect. Like in Unreal 4, you would see ambient occlusion even in like bright light, versus like now in Unreal 5, it's trying to be more accurate, so it actually turns it to more of like in the shadowed areas. You don't see any.
Yeah, it seems to be
more ambient occlusion there,
masked by like the shadow. What is it? The shadow, not buffer, but like where there's a shadow, that's where you will see ambient occlusion now instead.
Yeah.
I think the only, let me just double check here. The only other question was, so I'm a big fan of the custom primitive data, and I think it really got highlighted to me when I started seeing the posts about Concord, like the art posts on ArtStation, and I just started digging into it. There's some like nuances that make it feel strange to use or like or difficult to work at scale. And I noticed when you were playing with the stacked like wood panels, there you had to switch between them to do the settings. How do you? Is there issues with like working at production scale where you have to deal with like, I don't know, like let's say 50 to 100 props in a scene? Is it a lot of like tweaking, or can you copy and paste data pretty easily between the two? Or
it's so once you have it set up at least the first time around, it's very quick to like, I think if you just toggled like whatever the last CPD you have, which in my case is that UV set toggle, if I hit that plus button, it just turns on all of them and goes to whatever their default setting was before it was turned into CPD. The one thing I hate is you don't see the default mode, even like, again, it's an Unreal Engine thing. Like I just wish it would just keep the default option even if you have the CPD toggled or on or off, but it's Unreal Engine we're talking about. Like,
yeah,
they really don't take the time.
Like little nuances throughout.
Like,
yeah.
I think I hate is the fact that like when you look at a black and white image, it just shows red because technically that's the red channel. But I'm like, I don't want to see red if I'm looking at a black and white image. Like, it's such a little, again,
it's a very small thing, but yeah, it's for usability. It gets a little
because when I teach my students this kind of stuff, they're like, "Why is it red?" I'm like, "That's the first vertex color channel technically, so that's why it's red."
So it just defaults to the first channel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see if there's no. So okay, so I think that was all of our questions. Dude, that talk was there's a lot in there.
Yeah. I tried to like keep it as like, minimal as I could, but it's
Dude, it's
something that like
awesome.
it's
I mean, things need context as well. Like if
yeah,
you
that's true. And
try
that's
and
kind of how
minimize it, you'll miss out on like the little details that connect why you're doing what you're doing or how it even works.
yeah, it's kind of how I've been teaching with like, the videos and stuff too. A lot of people are like, "You're actually telling me why you have to do this." I'm like, "It's because whenever you watch a video, people just tell you to do this, this, and that, but not why you do this, this, and that and stuff."
The why is probably the most important because it gives you context, and context allows
Yeah,
you to bend and manipulate the information you've learned.
it's also it's like so you don't have to always follow the because a lot of students this could even go back to like how Jacob and they were talking and stuff like when you're going to school you follow the teacher and you listen but then when you graduate you don't have that teacher anymore to follow, so it's like you have to teach yourself.
Yeah.
And it's like if you don't know the why of these types of things, then you're kind of like, oh shit, what is vertex paint again, like how does this work and stuff, like I don't know. So it's like one of those things like you have to understand the context of these things so you can understand it a lot better, because as a teacher you understand something so well when you can teach it to someone else after.
Yes, dude. That when I've been just talking on stream, it stuff just sticks so much better when I'm just talking about it and showing someone or explaining the same thing, like 20 streams in a row in different ways because of the way that the person is asking, or like, so you learn how to talk about stuff, but then it also solidifies the hell out of it in your brain.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's something that when we talk about when we work with other disciplines, and it's like my current work, I work at a company that's a tech-based company, so it's not we have people from games, but not everyone is a game artist. Some people are more like physics scientists, so it's like I have to explain to them from game art terms what we mean by something in their physical terms. So it's like I'm trying to translate the language essentially.
Right, dude. That's wild. I do remember talking to a lighting artist who was using a program that helps calculate like how light passes through the atmosphere if the planet was of a different like origin, right? So it's not like Earth or whatever. And it's spitting out all this data, and he's just trying to figure out how it all works. And it's
that's
crazy.
That's how I feel it's going to be with substrate, because substrate's more scientific. It's like you're not dealing with materials, you're dealing with matter, and you have to understand like when they talk about like actual true transparency or even like true subsurface scattering, you have to understand the mean free path thing is essentially from the surface of like say your skin to like where it hits at the bottom. That's the depth that you have to create, and that's what mean free path is. And it's like, damn, I have to understand in like nanometers how subsurface scattering works. Like, what the hell?
They will eventually figure out a way to automate that value, is what it feels like.
I would hope.
Yeah.
I mean, my whole thing is like, substrate was something that it's come out, but it's like, I think it was rolled out really bad.
It's very early.
Yeah, it still feels very early, even though it's an official thing. And it's like, we can't really use it for anything right now. Like, it's like material layering, especially, like, it's so minute where it's like, oh, like, because I show it to my students and they're like, can't we already do this? I'm like, technically you can, but it's not as realistic. But it's like,
yeah, it's more of an approximation.
So it's like, do we have to know how to do like, metal, clear coat, dust, and then like all these extra like little matters of layer and stuff? And it's like, it's cool that you can do that. But
it's there as an option.
I'm like, it's there as an option. I mean, like, their glass is good because like glass, you can actually now have like diffuse glass with like actual diffuse roughness and stuff, which is really cool. But like that's like the only thing I can see right now until they can act. And well, the shading model mixing, like that's also really cool too. But like, it's too expensive still. Like, you put in two different layers and you already kind of start to run out of your G buffer. So it's like, again, to the guys that I was talking about earlier that were working in substrate, I hope they're doing well.
Yeah.
I'm like, they want to do material layering and they like had one Uber shader and stuff. I'm like, power to you, man.
Yeah, you got to break it apart, like you're saying. There
Yeah.
is one more question since we were talking about CPD, and it's
Mhm.
CPD, or like the custom primitive data. Can you copy
Mhm.
CPD data or CPD to another asset if you want to change, say, the color later stage? Like, you know how in like the settings you can hold shift and right click to copy like all the data? If you
Mhm.
shift left click, you can usually paste. I don't know if you can do that with CPD.
I mean, that would be great if you could do it like through like the actual details tab. The only thing, yeah, that's the one thing. Like, because I'm trying to think, like, because normally like with a material you can just copy and paste like the nodes and just bring them
Yeah.
back in. It's like the same parameters, same name, same everything. Because it's attached to the it's an instance technically.
Yeah.
I don't think you can access that information. So I
Right.
think
And
it
if you
comes
dupe
down
the
to
prop,
just
it wipes it anyways, right? On the dupe.
basically.
Yeah.
So like that's kind of like where the big issue is that, and it's kind of going back to your question about like the how does it work at scale? Like when you try and go
Yeah.
into like a large project, it's one of those things of you kind of have to have an asset gem to kind of help manage it, and you got to give it to whoever's the newest junior to kind of keep an eye on those things.
Oh, the struggle. Dude, okay.
Hey, I tell my students that all the time. Like my first job, I can probably find it. I have my journal when I was at Infinity Ward. I literally just had Excel sheets of all their materials that were out of PBR to get them back into PBR, and they had like materials from OG Modern Warfare. Like I'm like,
Oh, and you
that's
just had
like,
to
why
try
do
and
we have
convert
these
it.
things? Yeah, I had to like go into Photoshop and like try and use like Dedo to try and like turn it into like a PBR
Yeah.
material, basically.
Oh man.
Not fun.
Yeah. Yeah. So at least in my experiences, I've avoided giving juniors the like we take the crappy jobs equally when possible. The first things that I was working on before we get out of here, I'll just tangent on this for a minute. I used to make the nav mesh manually, model the nav mesh,
Oh my god.
and then model the collision for the camera because it was too expensive to have collision on the props. So we just made like volumes for the camera to write across.
Oh my god.
And I was like, this is going to take too long to do. So I started approximating it in ZBrush and like dynamite, like melting everything together. And then,
okay, yeah, that makes a lot more sense now. Okay, that's
made it
thinking
much
smarter
easier.
than Harvey, honestly.
But yeah, it was rough, man.
Yeah, it was like how I would just like we need like ambient occlusion maps for stuff, so I would just like go into the normal map and just take the blue channel and just crank it down a little bit, and that's how we would make ambient occlusion basically.
Oh my god, yeah, dude, game dev's funny. It's funny like
always
that.
fun.
I think that's it. I really appreciate you taking the time to go through all of that. It was very dense with a ton of really good information.
Hopefully, I did not just destroy everyone's brains at that point. Hopefully
I mean,
not.
it's okay. I think we can recover. I think we'll be all right. It's always good to see, like, because for me, I would say that's at like the upper edge of like how you're using shaders now, versus just doing like the more traditional tileable materials and uniquely baking. But yeah, I appreciate it, man. I think we're gonna get out of here now. We're like 40-ish minutes over, something like that. But
something like that.
No, it's great. I thank you very much, and I'm sure
Of course.
everyone really appreciated it. Cool. I guess we'll talk later.
Of course, yeah.
Thanks,
See ya,
guys.
Jeremy.